Chapter 701, Furong's Twisted Thoughts. Harry felt his mind, previously dulled by alcohol, rapidly clearing. He blinked and stared at Hermione, whose expression was serious, as confusion surged within him like a rising tide. "Come on, Hermione," Ron interjected, his curiosity piqued. "You said Fleur invited Harry to the ball to use him, but what could she possibly want from Harry?" Ron's involvement seemed to bring him back to his senses. He eyed Hermione suspiciously and added, "Are you jealous? I know Fleur isn't very popular with the girls. You think she's too beautiful and steals the spotlight from you all." Harry, too, turned to Hermione, his face a picture of innocence. "Jealous? Is that what you think, Weasley?" Hermione's eyes flashed with anger at Ron's insinuation, and she regretted the impulsive decision she had made earlier that evening. She glared at Ron, her lips pressed tightly together. Sensing impending trouble, Ron quickly fell silent and gave Harry a subtle nudge. "Hermione," Harry began cautiously, "I don't quite understand what Ron said. What does Fleur want to use me for?" "Good question, Harry," Hermione replied, shifting her gaze from Ron to Harry. "When she invited you, didn't you wonder why? Don't be fooled by her charm over a bowl of fish soup and some directions." Harry opened his mouth to speak, but Hermione continued, "Do you really think Fleur doesn't know that the dress you gave her was bought by Professor Blaine? Oh, Harry, don't be naive. You're underestimating her." Ron, still squinting at Hermione, was eager to hear her insights, while Harry's confusion deepened. How did Fleur know the dress was from Professor Blaine? And if she did, why invite him? They barely spoke beyond a few encounters. "What do you think of Fleur's final request to you, Harry?" Hermione asked coldly. "What?" Harry responded instinctively, recalling that before Professor McGonagall summoned them on their first night, Fleur had asked him to relay a message to Professor Blaine about them being dance partners. At the time, Harry was too preoccupied with the professor's summons to think much of it. Now, Hermione's words made him reconsider. What did this have to do with Professor Blaine? Why did Fleur want him to inform Professor Blaine? "Fleur once invited Professor Blaine to the dance, but he declined," Hermione revealed. The two boys beside her reacted with surprise, as she had anticipated, and Ron nearly toppled off the sofa. "Fleur invited Professor Blaine to the ball and was turned down? That's unbelievable. How did you find out, Hermione?" Ron asked, propping himself back up on the sofa, his voice low and incredulous. "Many girls know about this," Hermione replied, pursing her lips. "But you boys don't pay attention to these things. You're only focused on finding a pretty girl to take to the prom." Ron shrank back, embarrassed. Hermione wasn't wrong. "But this news," Harry began, finally sensing something amiss, his brow furrowing. "I don't know if you noticed, but about a week ago, Fleur seemed unhappy for a couple of days. Every time. She arrived at the castle for class, always wearing a cold expression and saying nothing. Observing the blank faces of the two boys, Hermione snorted sarcastically. "You haven't noticed, have you?" "Oh, it's not surprising. Boys are just focused on her pretty face, right?" "Hermione," Harry interjected, sounding both helpless and a bit dissatisfied. "It was Parvati who told me," Hermione continued, "and Parvati heard it from her Ravenclaw sister Padma. You should know that the guests from Bobans follow the same rules as Ravenclaw students. During classes, Padma and her friends noticed that Fleur seemed unhappy, so they tried every means to find out what was wrong with her." "Oh, you girls are so boring," Ron blurted out without thinking, and Harry nodded in agreement. However, upon seeing Hermione's livid expression, the two boys quickly became quiet again. "They asked others at Beauxbatons, but no one knew what had happened," Hermione went on. "Finally, Hay found Fleur's sister, the little girl named Gabrielle. It took them a while, but they eventually got the story from her. Padma told Parvati, and then, when she was discussing it with Lavender, I overheard." After saying this, Hermione seemed to calm. She looked at Harry steadily. "So, do you understand, Harry?" Harry and Ron exchanged glances, neither daring to speak first. Fleur had invited Professor Atticus Blaine to the dance, and was rejected. This was indeed intriguing, but what did it have to do with her inviting Harry? Hermione suggested Fleur was using him. Harry hesitated, unsure of what to say, and Hermione realized that expecting him to understand the nuances of the situation was wishful thinking. She explained calmly, Fleur must have known Professor Blaine for a while and had a crush on him. That's why she asked you where his office was on her first day at Hogwarts. I guess she didn't expect him to refuse her invitation to the prom. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so upset. So she wanted to find someone very famous to attend the prom with, to make Professor Blaine realize that rejecting her was a mistake. Hermione's explanation helped Harry and Ron understand why she was so upset with Harry for accepting Fleur's invitation, but they still found it puzzling. Girls are so weird, Ron muttered, frowning. But this is just your guess, isn't it, Hermione? Hermione merely pursed her lips, choosing not to dignify Ron's question with a response. If Fleur wants to find someone famous, Harry mused, frowning thoughtfully, why doesn't she go find someone else? He initially thought Fleur could ask one of the tournament champions, as they were the most popular boys at the moment. However, thinking of Cho Chang, he couldn't bring himself to mention Cedric's name. Krum has invited Daphne Greengrass to the ball, Hermione said, her sharp eyes catching the dimness in Harry's. She seemed to read his mind and calmly shared another piece of news that surprised the two boys. Of course, a champion would be a better choice, but Fleur doesn't have many options left, does she? Besides the champions, who at Hogwarts is more famous than you, Harry? Harry had begun to accept Hermione's reasoning. He fell silent, feeling his enthusiasm for the Yule Ball diminish. First, Cedric invited Cho Chang, and now Fleur invited him with the intention of voking Professor Blaine. These events had completely dampened his excitement for the ball. Noticing Harry's disinterest, Ron rubbed his freckled nose. Maybe you're being too hard on Fleur, Hermione. From my perspective, this situation seems quite simple. Fleur was rejected by Professor Blaine, and Atticus Blaine is a warrior, and she must find someone to accompany her to the ball. She has a favorable impression of Harry, so she invited him. It's that simple. But how do you explain what Fleur asked Harry to convey to Professor Blaine? Hermione's question left Ron utterly speechless. End of this chapter. Chapter 702, Terrifying Speculations. Hermione couldn't ignore Harry's dejection, nor could she dismiss how he might feel after her words. It was this very thought that made her even more uneasy. Harry, she called softly, holding his arm with her right hand as she noticed his shocked expression. Oh, I'm fine, Harry replied after a moment of daze. He realized Hermione was holding his arm, but he wasn't as upset as she feared. Instead, he managed to smile. I just think it's a little funny. Now that they all agreed with Hermione's conjecture, the question remained, what should they do next? Should Harry approach Fleur and tell her he wouldn't accompany her to the Yule Ball? The idea that Fleur might want to make Professor Blaine jealous seemed absurd. Even Ron wouldn't believe that Professor Blaine would be angered by such a trivial matter. After all, Professor Blaine's nonchalant smile earlier that evening had said it all. Neither Hermione nor Ron intended to influence Harry's decision, leaving it up to him to decide. Let's talk about what Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine are concerned about, Ron said, trying to lift the mood. They're after the Dark Mark, right? Do you think they've found a clue? Hermione glanced at Ron appreciatively, understanding that his curiosity was genuine. The Ministry of Magic had claimed that the masked man who caused the riot at the Quidditch final had evaded capture and conjured the Dark Mark after everyone had left. But such a statement could only fool young wizards and ordinary people. Those truly knowledgeable knew it was a lie. The Ministry had previously announced that Vidia Cleona, expelled by Atticus Blaine, and the masked wizard who initiated the chaos were admirers of the Dark Lord. These dark wizards worshipped him and committed various crimes, yet they had never seen him. They were merely poor imitators. However, the Dark Mark was not a simple spell that only you-know-whose Death Eaters could produce. Did you notice, Ron? Hermione asked, her own mind filled with doubts. She lowered her head, staring at her toes, and after a moment of silence spoke softly. Professors Dumbledore and Blaine seem very concerned about Mr. Crouch. But it can't be him, right? Ron whispered, ensuring no one passing by could overhear them discussing a senior ministry official. Barty only arrived with his father and the others after the mark appeared. He didn't have time to do it. I'm not saying that Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine suspect Barty Crouch, Ron, Hermione replied, frowning slightly. I know Crouch had no opportunity, And of course it's not Winky either. But Hermione's hesitant tone revealed her uncertainty. Professor Blaine seemed particularly interested in whether Barty attended the game. He and Professor Dumbledore repeatedly asked us if anyone had occupied the empty seat that Winky held for Crouch. Crouch didn't enter the box. Harry confirmed that, didn't he? Just because Crouch wasn't there doesn't mean the seat was empty, Ron, Hermione said, her voice tinged with horror. What if someone was sitting there all along? Ron and Harry, who had been emotionless, gradually showed fear in their expressions. Are you suggesting there was an invisible person watching us from the box that night? Harry asked, his voice filled with apprehension. Intrigued by the topic, Atticus Blaine asked, somewhat bewildered. And that person is a Death Eater? Ron, with a similarly blank expression, replied, but isn't that seat occupied by the elf named Winky for Barty? Do you realize what you're suggesting, Hermione? You're implying that Crouch is covering for a Death Eater. You mustn't say that in front of Percy, Hermione, or he'll tear you apart. Hermione nodded, confirming Harry's suspicion about the invisibility cloak, but remained silent. If her theory was correct, and the empty seat next to Winky was indeed meant for an invisible person, how did Professor Blaine and Professor Dumbledore know about it? They had left before arriving at the school to investigate this matter. Did they find the invisible person, or did they uncover clues elsewhere? While others might forget and move on, Hermione couldn't shake the mystery surrounding her selection as a champion. There was still no clear explanation of who had placed her name into the Goblet of Fire. On the night Professor Blaine selected the champions, the heads of several schools and Ministry of Magic officials had discussed the matter in a room behind the auditorium. As she recalled, everyone capable of such a feat was present in that room. Barty Crouch. Hermione's eyes flickered with disbelief. Could it have been Barty Crouch who submitted her name to the Goblet of Fire? It seemed impossible. When Barty appeared at Hogwarts that night, the Goblet of Fire was in the hall, under the watchful eyes of many. No one could have tampered with it unnoticed. However, if her suspicion was correct and the esteemed ministry official was secretly linked to a Death Eater, where was this Death Eater now? Hermione's face paled at the thought. Could this person have infiltrated Hogwarts and, either independently or under Barty Crouch's orders, placed her name in the Goblet of Fire? The idea was so far-fetched and absurd that she couldn't bring herself to share it with Harry and Ron. On the night the champions were chosen, when faced with accusations from the heads of Durmstrang and Beauxbatons, Professor Dumbledore proposed a surprising solution. To appease Professor Karkaroff and Madame Maxime, he suggested destroying the Goblet of Fire, nullifying the contract with the champions, and allowing the 3 other champions to continue competing. This would protect Hermione from danger while allowing the Triwizard Tournament to proceed. From Hermione's perspective, it was a sound plan, except for the destruction of the Goblet of Fire. The person who reacted most vehemently to Dumbledore's proposal was Barty Crouch. He adamantly opposed the destruction of the Goblet of Fire and ultimately confirmed Hermione's status as a champion. To placate Crouch, Karkaroff, and Madame Maxime, Crouch suggested that Hogwarts' score in the competition be the average of her and Cedric's scores. Given Barty Crouch's position as a senior ministry official, his reaction seemed reasonable under the circumstances. As the primary ministry official promoting the tournament, he certainly wouldn't want to see the Goblet of Fire destroyed. However, after discussing the Dark Mark incident with Professors Dumbledore and Blaine, Hermione's doubts about Barty Crouch only intensified. Meanwhile, the young wizards continued to drink and socialize. The common room's atmosphere only slightly less lively than when they first returned, and the fire in the nearby fireplace burned brightly. However, Hermione's heart grew increasingly cold. Professor Dumbledore must have anticipated that some would oppose the destruction of the Goblet of Fire, yet he still proposed it. Was this a test? That night, Professor Blaine had clearly stated that everyone capable of casting spells on the Goblet of Fire was present in that office. Professors Dumbledore and Blaine were undoubtedly the authorities, and when their opinions aligned, Hermione found it difficult to question their judgment. The more she pondered Professor Blaine's statement and Professor Dumbledore's suggestion, the more it seemed like a test. Hermione lifted her head to look at Ron and Harry, her face alarmingly pale. If her suspicions were correct, then Barty Crouch was not as righteous as he appeared. Was it Barty alone, or were Barty and a Death Eater in the room behind the Great Hall that night? End of this chapter. Chapter 703, Getting to the Bottom of Things. The long-awaited Christmas had finally arrived, blanketing the world in heavy snow. The castle and campus were alive with a joyful atmosphere, as never before had so many young wizards chosen to stay at school for the holiday. The corridors echoed with their cheerful voices and laughter as students gathered in small groups, eagerly discussing the evening's dance. The only downside was the bitter cold, the harshest of the year. Atticus Blaine, carrying a large bag, made his way up to the owlery at the top of the tower. The outdoor corridor leading to the hut was treacherous, covered in a thick layer of ice. It was a hazard that could easily send a student slipping, giving Madame Pomfrey more work than she needed. Atticus, noticing the danger, blinked thoughtfully before drawing his wand. With a swift motion, he conjured a strong wind that swept through the air, melting the ice as if the ground had been heated. The once slippery surface was now dry, revealing the brown rock floor tiles beneath. The sudden gust caused a stir in the owlery. Many owls, startled by the commotion, flapped their wings and screeched, fleeing through the windows in a flurry of feathers. As Atticus stepped into the corridor, he encountered three familiar faces, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, each covered in owl feathers, looking slightly disheveled. "Professor Blaine?" they exclaimed in unison, recognizing the source of their predicament. Despite their surprise, Atticus noticed a hint of hesitation in their demeanor. "What brings you here?" Atticus inquired casually, allowing the large package to float behind him as he entered the dimly lit shed. The trio lingered at the door, seemingly reluctant to leave. "Oh, I was just writing home, Professor Blaine," Hermione replied, her voice tinged with nervousness. "I sent Christmas presents, but they arrived late." Atticus glanced at Hermione, easily discerning the falsehood in her words. Yet he chose not to call her out. After all, those who nitpick over every detail often find themselves disliked. "I faced a similar issue," Atticus remarked, surveying the owls. "I bought some Wizarding World candies for the children at the orphanage where I grew up. It took me ages to choose. You know, sending something like a chocolate doll could be disastrous for them and for me. Perhaps it's the snow, but the owls haven't been very efficient." "Children from an orphanage?" Ron blurted out, only to be silenced by simultaneous kicks from Harry and Hermione. Realizing his faux pas, Ron recalled that Harry had mentioned Atticus's background in a conversation last year. As Ron stammered an apology, Atticus turned to Harry with mild surprise. "You didn't tell Hermione and Ron about me?" "No," Harry replied earnestly, sincerity in his eyes. "May I, Professor?" "What a surprise," Atticus mused, reaching out to catch a gray owl. "Since you..." Atticus Blaine had kept the secret for so long, and he intended to keep it that way. "Harry, please hand me the sturdy brown owl above your head," he requested. The gift Atticus had purchased was too heavy, even for 4 owls to carry together. To lighten the load, he unpacked the package and removed several large bags of B. Duke's candies. "Consider it a Christmas gift," Atticus said, tossing a bag to each of the 3 young students and tucking the remaining bag under his arm, intending to give it to Principal Dumbledore. Dumbledore had subtly hinted at wanting a Christmas present when Atticus released Winky, and this bag of candy seemed fitting. As the 4 owls disappeared from view, Atticus sighed with relief, exited the owlery, and headed toward the tower, with Harry, Ron, and Hermione trailing behind. "You're leading the dance with the other champions tonight, right, Hermione? Who's your partner?" Atticus inquired unexpectedly. Hermione, who had been planning to gather information from Professor Blaine, was caught off guard by the question. She glanced at Ron, whose cheeks flushed red in an instant. "Yes," Hermione admitted after a brief hesitation. "It's Ron, Professor Blaine." Ron quickly lowered his head, focusing intently on his shoes. "Is that so?" Atticus remarked with mild surprise before regaining his composure. "I think that's a good choice. And you, Harry?" Before Harry could respond, Atticus tapped his forehead lightly. "Oh, I'm sorry, Harry. You're going to the ball with Fleur. I forgot you mentioned that to me." Harry's lips twitched, unsure of what to say. Despite having been preoccupied with this matter for days, he suddenly felt an urge to laugh. Fleur had wanted to make an impression on Professor Blaine, but he seemed to have completely forgotten about it. As they descended the stairs, more and more young wizards crossed their path. Hermione realized that if she didn't ask her question soon, it might become inappropriate in a crowded setting. She observed Professor Blaine's calm demeanor, took a deep breath, and stepped in front of Harry. "Professor Blaine," Hermione began softly, controlling her breathing, "you and Professor Dumbledore released Winky, didn't you? Could you tell me where she went?" Atticus's eyebrows twitched slightly, and the weight of his casual glance nearly overwhelmed Hermione's courage. "You're well informed, Hermione," he said, without any obvious displeasure in his tone. Her cheeks reddened as she hesitantly explained, "Yes, Professor, we were planning to visit Dobby. He told us that Winky hasn't returned to work in the kitchen since that night, so we guessed that you and Professor Dumbledore might have freed her." Hermione had not shared her suspicions about Crouch with Professor Blaine. After discussing it with Harry and Ron, Harry had suggested they inquire with Winky, only to learn from Dobby that there was no news of her at Hogwarts. "Very perceptive, Hermione," Atticus replied calmly. "Winky has indeed been released. It's all right to tell you. You probably know how reluctant she was to work at Hogwarts. She longed to return to Barty Crouch. Some time ago, I visited Barty. You might not be aware, but Mr. Barty Crouch was ill and had taken leave. When I saw him, he was very unwell, yet he refused to go to St. Mungo's or have anyone care for him. So I suggested that Winky return to look after him." "Professor Blaine," Hermione interjected, her curiosity piqued. Harry and Ron exchanged furtive glances, sensing that there might be more to this situation than met the eye. Hermione realized it might be impolite to persist with her questioning, but her curiosity about the truth was too strong to ignore. Gathering her courage, she pressed on. "Professor Blaine, you visited Mr. Barty Crouch because you suspected it was connected to the dark mark that appeared on the field the night of the Quidditch final, didn't you?" End of this chapter. Chapter 7-4, New Tricks for the Banquet? Atticus Blaine sighed inwardly. He realized that the conversation between himself and Dumbledore had piqued the curiosity of the three young students. However, lacking crucial information, they had drawn the wrong conclusions. Atticus had no intention of clarifying their misunderstandings, as this was not a matter they could involve themselves in. "My humble opinion, Hermione," he began, as they descended to the second floor. Young wizards from all over were gathering to head to the Great Hall for breakfast. On the second floor landing, Atticus paused, observing Harry, Hermione, and Ron, who were engrossed in their detective game. With a smile, he continued, "Instead of exhausting yourselves trying to uncover every mystery, why not set aside your worries and enjoy this wonderful Christmas? What do you think?" Hermione's lips tightened, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, while Harry and Ron avoided Professor Blaine's gaze. In his usual manner, Professor Blaine's words felt like a gentle reprimand. Just as the trio was scrambling to find words to apologize, the familiar sound of wooden sticks tapping against the floor echoed from the nearby stairs. This sound, which they knew well, caught not only their attention, but also that of Professor Blaine. "Oh, Professor Moody," Atticus remarked, noticing Alastor's snow-dusted cloak and boots. He raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What's going on? Are you planning to go out?" "Oh, Blaine." Professor Moody's magical eye seemed to have momentarily malfunctioned, as he appeared surprised to encounter Atticus and the trio there. After a brief pause, he limped over and barked, "That's right, Blaine, I have to patrol the Forbidden Forest." Moody continued, "You all know I usually prefer nighttime activities, as those despicable folks like to use the cover of darkness for their misdeeds. But Albus seems to think I shouldn't miss the evening festivities. Ho ho, the Yule Ball, it's quite something." He let out a series of gruff laughs, then added, "Since Albus insists, I'll attend, but I can't leave that forest unattended. Who knows how many schemers are lurking in there?" The trio looked at Professor Moody with admiration. Braving the cold and heavy snow to patrol the Forbidden Forest, preparing for a potential threat that might never occur, was truly commendable. "Oh, really?" Atticus nodded thoughtfully. After a moment of silence, he tossed the bag of candies he had been carrying into Professor Moody's arms. Moody's mismatched eyes widened in surprise. Atticus shrugged innocently and said in a casual tone, "I guess you won't have time to return for lunch, Professor Moody. Consider it a New Year's gift." Harry speculated that Professor Moody had likely never received a gift like candy before. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so taken aback by the gesture. His normal blue eye even seemed a bit touched. However, Harry couldn't help but notice the irony. Professor Blaine had given away the candy he hadn't yet gifted as Christmas presents. It was so typical of him. A secret smile crept onto Harry's face, and any lingering resentment towards Professor Blaine over the Fleur incident faded away. After all, Professor Blaine's attitude towards Fleur was nothing to fret over, right? While Professor Moody remained in a daze, Professor Blaine had already turned and headed downstairs, with the trio quickly following. The Great Hall was already bustling with students enjoying their breakfast. In the bustling auditorium, the evening dance was the talk of the school, but students were equally captivated by the auditorium's extraordinary elegance. Traditionally, not many students celebrated Christmas at school, but every year after the first snowfall, Hagrid would begin decorating the Christmas tree in the auditorium. The castle would be adorned with colorful ribbons, mistletoe, and ivy. However, this year, despite the grander Christmas dinner, the auditorium was sparsely decorated, save for a few symbolic cedars. This lack of decoration seemed out of place on such a special day, prompting students to speculate about the school's intentions. Some curious students even approached the professors for answers, but even Professor Flitwick and Professor Sprout, who usually enjoyed sharing secrets with the young wizards, remained tight-lipped, simply advising them to look forward to the evening. "Oh, Professor Blaine, good morning." Atticus Blaine was descending to the first floor, about to head to the auditorium, when Victor Crumb, Durmstrang's champion, entered with his classmates, clearly there for breakfast as well. Crumb's face was as gloomy as ever, but upon seeing Atticus, a brief look of panic crossed his features. After a quick greeting, he and his classmates hurried to the Slytherin table. "Good morning, Mr. Crumb," Atticus replied with a slight smile, though a hint of doubt lingered in his furrowed brow. Crumb had once admired him, a fact that hadn't escaped Atticus's notice, but recently the young man's demeanor had shifted. Every encounter seemed to leave Crumb eager to distance himself. Was Karkaroff instructing him to keep away, or was Crumb upset over Atticus inadvertently thwarting his invitation to Hermione for the ball? Regardless of the reason, Atticus didn't dwell on it. He turned to the three young students with a smile, saying, "See you tonight, everyone," before heading to the staff table without further inquiry. Harry, Hermione, and Ron exchanged looks of resignation and made their way to the Gryffindor table. After breakfast, the trio spent half an hour on the snow-covered Quidditch pitch. With the evening banquet in mind, they decided to move their training session earlier. The rest of the morning was spent in the common room, admiring the gifts they had received, much like their classmates. They then returned to the auditorium for a lavish lunch, featuring at least 100 turkeys, as of heaps of Christmas puddings, and mountains of cribbage wizard biscuits. In the afternoon, they ventured outside to the fields, engaging in a snowball fight on the white lawn with their Gryffindor classmates. Hermione, however, preferred to watch Harry and the Weasley brothers from the sidelines, choosing not to participate. They also made time to visit Hagrid. "Oh, you'll be truly amazed," Hagrid exclaimed, handing them hot tea while tending to the blast-ended Scroots. Professor Blaine came up with an idea for the evening banquet, and all the professors were in full agreement. Honestly, I sometimes wonder where he gets all these brilliant ideas. Despite piquing their curiosity, Hagrid refused to divulge any more details, no matter how much they pleaded. "Just wait and see. It's only a few hours away, isn't it?" he said with a smile. "Just a few hours to go." As Ron left Hagrid's hut, he grumbled, "If there's any need to keep it secret, I want to see what new tricks I can come up with." His frustration was evident, and the three friends, Harry, Hermione, and Ron, had no desire to linger outside after their visit with Hagrid. With 3 hours remaining until the banquet, they decided to return to the common room. "Make yourself presentable, Harry. Hermione advised as she prepared to head back to the dormitory to freshen up. Since Fleur wants to take advantage of you, let her have a good look at you. She cast a glance at Ron, and as their eyes met, a blush crept onto their cheeks. You too, Ron, Hermione added softly before turning and dashing away. Make it presentable, Ron muttered dejectedly once Hermione had disappeared around the corner of the stairs. What on earth? Is that dress my mother bought me still popular from centuries ago? If you don't mind, Harry offered with a shrug, we can switch, Ron. I don't care what Fleur thinks of me. For a brief moment, Ron seemed intrigued by Harry's suggestion. However, after scrutinizing Harry's attire, his enthusiasm waned. Forget it, Harry. I can't fit into your clothes. End of this chapter. Chapter 705. At least lend me some money. Waiting is the most painful thing. Although the evening dance was scheduled for 8 o'clock, by 5 o'clock, young wizards were already emerging from the tower and basement, anxiously gathering in the auditorium. The anticipation was palpable as they settled into their seats. Are they really planning to hold a banquet like this? Ernie Macmillan of Hufflepuff wondered aloud, glancing upwards with a furrowed brow. He turned to Justin Finch-Fletchley beside him, echoing the sentiments of many in the crowded hall. The ceiling, usually adorned with a deep summer starry sky, was bare, revealing its original state. Even the floating candles, typically abundant during meals, were sparse, providing just enough light to see. This stark contrast left the students feeling a sense of disappointment, unable to believe that the school would treat their long-awaited Christmas dance so casually. As the clock neared 6, faculty and staff began to appear, catching the attention of the young wizards. Professor Flitwick and Professor Sprout were soon surrounded by curious students, eager for answers. Yet, the professors merely smiled and remained silent, as if determined to keep the secret until the last moment. Draco Malfoy, dressed in a black velvet high-collar dress robe, scanned the room, but did not see Professor Blaine. His gaze shifted to Professor Snape, who stood lazily in his usual attire. After a moment's thought, Draco approached him. "What's going on, Professor?" Draco asked, raising his chin defiantly. "Has Hogwarts become so shabby without the Malfoy family's financial support?" "It's Atticus," Snape replied, glancing at Draco and Pansy Parkinson, who stood close by in a light pink robe. "He's up to something new. Don't ask me, Draco. He wants us to keep it a secret." Snape's words, though intended to be discreet, quickly spread among the students. Whispers and curious discussions filled the air as they speculated about Professor Blaine's plans. Some even considered seeking him out for answers. Meanwhile, Atticus Blaine was far from idle. Although the banquet was an internal event, key figures from the Ministry of Magic, who had initiated this gathering, were expected to attend. As Hogwarts' representative, it was his duty to welcome them. Percy Weasley had appeared in his office just after lunch, chattering excitedly all afternoon. Following Professor Blaine's advice, Percy had asked his father to introduce him to friends at the Ministry, leading to changes in his work. "Those annoying little things are gone," Percy exclaimed for the 7th time, his enthusiasm undiminished. "I'm glad you're excelling at your job, Percy, but now that we're off, I'm afraid there are many people in the Great Hall waiting for me to appear," Atticus said, adjusting his slim-fitting navy blue dress robe. His neatly trimmed hairstyle and sharp, handsome features made even Percy pause in admiration as Professor Blaine rose from his desk. "All right, Professor," Percy replied, reluctantly leaving his unfinished thoughts behind as he followed Atticus out of the office. "Regarding the proposal I mentioned last time, Miss Bones' suggestion to expand the team of batters, though Ms. Umbridge opposed it, Ms. Bones stood firm. Now, the minister's office has sent an inquiry to Mr. Crouch. Minister Fudge—" Atticus Blaine was eager to hear Mr. Crouch's suggestions. "Professor, how should I handle this situation? Do you think I should write to Mr. Crouch for advice?" Percy asked persistently. A peculiar glint flickered in Atticus's eyes. If one were to consider how the real Barty Crouch might assess the situation, it was uncertain. However, the man currently residing in Barty's house would likely disagree. "I believe you should support Ms. Bones' proposal, Percy," Atticus suggested thoughtfully as they turned a corner on the 2nd floor. Old Barty spent his life battling dark wizards. He would want the ministry to bolster its efforts against evil. "You're right, Professor." Percy's eyes lit up with understanding, and he nodded in agreement. Watching Percy mumble excitedly to himself, Atticus couldn't help but smirk inwardly. He thought, if you want to engage in politics, you can't be so naive. "Oh, Atticus!" As they descended to the second floor, an enthusiastic voice echoed down the corridor. It was Ludo Bagman, approaching with Professor McGonagall by his side. "You're simply radiant," Ludo exclaimed, striding towards Atticus. He seemed oblivious to Percy's subtle disdain, focusing solely on Atticus with a broad grin. "Thank you, Ludo," Atticus replied, smiling as he took in Ludo Bagman's bright purple robe. "You seem to be in high spirits, Ludo. What's the good news?" "Oh, you know me too well, Atticus." Ludo chuckled, draping an arm around Atticus's shoulders. He then turned to Professor McGonagall, who was watching Percy with a satisfied expression. "Sorry, Minerva. Oh, and Percy, I need to share some secrets with Atticus. Could you give us a moment?" Professor McGonagall glanced at Atticus, and after receiving a subtle nod, she agreed. "Of course, Ludo. Come along, Percy. Let's head to the auditorium. Professor Karkaroff and Madame Maxime are likely already there." Ludo watched as Percy and Professor McGonagall descended the stairs, waiting until their voices faded. Then he turned to Atticus, who wore a resigned expression. "Don't look so glum, Atticus," Ludo said cheerfully. "I have some exciting news to share." "I hope it's good news, Ludo, but make it quick," Atticus sighed, allowing himself to be led behind a tapestry by Ludo. "Well, Atticus, to thank you for your patience and generosity earlier this year, remember our trip to Paris? I want to share some valuable information with you." "Every word is worth a handful of galleons," Ludo declared. "You're welcome, Ludo. Please go on," Atticus replied, his face impassive, having anticipated this moment. Ludo didn't speak immediately. Instead, he cautiously peeked out from behind the tapestry, ensuring they were alone. Satisfied, he withdrew and whispered, "I have some insider information, Atticus. Some friends told me." Ludo's eyes gleamed with excitement. "You know the goblins who secured the rights to broadcast the tournament have set up a betting pool in Paris on who will win the Triwizard tournament. A group of Germans plans to wager a substantial amount of gold galleons on the girl from Minerva Academy, betting she won't finish the competition. The sum they're putting up is significant. Once this group officially places their bets, others will follow. By then, Granger's odds of winning will skyrocket. If, Ludo gripped Atticus's arm tightly, his voice trembling with anticipation. "We can counter the Germans' bet, as long as you ensure Granger completes the tournament. Atticus, just imagine it. Gold galleons will fill your pockets." Atticus Blaine's face was clouded with a somber expression as he fixed his gaze on Ludo Bagman. His voice, though soft, carried an unmistakable chill. "In my opinion, Ludo, Azkaban would be a more fitting place for you." With those words, Atticus turned to leave. However, Ludo was not ready to let him go. He clung to Atticus's arm, his eyes pleading earnestly. "You don't agree with this plan, Atticus? Fine, I really don't understand. It's like gold being handed to you on a platter." Ludo took a few deep breaths before exclaiming, "At least for the sake of our friendship, Atticus, please lend me some money. I swear on my Hornets uniform that as soon as I win, I'll pay you back with interest." End of this chapter. Chapter 706, A Fleeting Moment. "I'm warning you, Ludo." Atticus Blaine pulled his hand away, a dangerous glint in his eyes causing Ludo Bagman to freeze. "I've warned you before, and I must reiterate today. Don't think about profiting from the competition. If you persist in this stubbornness, I dare say you'll find yourself in Azkaban sooner or later." Ludo seemed ready to argue, but a sudden shout from the stairs, descending from the third floor, interrupted him. "Who's there?" Ludo fell silent, while Atticus narrowed his eyes, adjusted his expression, and calmly stepped out from behind the tapestry to face the trio of Harry, Hermione, and Ron coming downstairs. "Ah, it's you again," Atticus said, his expression softening. "What a coincidence." The voice from the stairs belonged to Hermione. Even Atticus couldn't help but admire the radiant young girl standing there. She looked different from that morning at Hogwarts. Her hair, once matted, was now smooth and shiny, elegantly styled into a bun. She wore a robe of shimmering light purple and blue fabric, and her demeanor had transformed, perhaps due to the absence of her usual school bag and old-fashioned wizard robe. Beside Hermione, Harry stood tall, his training evident in the sharpness of his features, yet he exuded a newfound competence and composure. In contrast, Ron's appearance was less polished, mainly due to his retro-style attire. He seemed aware of his less-than-stellar image, keeping a distance from Harry and Hermione and avoiding Hermione's gaze altogether. As Atticus looked at the three young wizards, he was momentarily lost in thought. Just 2 years ago, when he had returned to Hogwarts, these little guys barely reached his chest. Time had flown by, and now they stood before him, so grown and presentable. While Professor Blaine observed them, Harry, Hermione, and Ron were also taking in the sight of their professor. In the past, Professor Blaine often wore old robes, and his otherworldly magical prowess, coupled with his calm demeanor, gave the impression of someone much older. But now, with his hair styled and dressed youthfully, he appeared like a dazzling star. For the first time, Harry, Hermione, and Ron realized that the age gap between them and Professor Blaine wasn't as vast as they had imagined. "Oh, I'm sorry, Professor. I didn't know it was you." Hermione's confidence wavered upon seeing Professor Blaine emerge from behind the tapestry. She pursed her lips slightly and spoke softly, unable to tear her gaze away from him. "Aha!" Ludo Bagman suddenly leaped out from behind the tapestry, grinning at Hermione. "Here's our youngest champion." Ludo seemed oblivious to the change in Hermione's demeanor since the first task. To him, she shone with a captivating golden light. Ludo's abrupt appearance left Hermione and the others momentarily stunned. Before they could react, Ludo had already circled around Atticus, his bright smile directed at Hermione. "How's it going, Miss Granger? How's the research going?" Ludo's abrupt change of topic caught Hermione off guard, momentarily disrupting her sharp train of thought. "The golden egg, that golden egg," Ludo prompted. "Have you found any clues for the second task of the competition, Miss Granger?" "Oh," Hermione exclaimed, a hint of embarrassment coloring her fair cheeks. Just as she struggled to respond, Professor Atticus Blaine came to her rescue. "Why are we discussing this on such a delightful holiday? Ludo, come on, let's head downstairs." Atticus shot Ludo a warning glance before gesturing to Harry and the others. "Join us. Let's go to the foyer and let your friends see how splendid you look." By the time Atticus, Ludo, and Hermione reached the foyer, it was already teeming with people. Although most of the younger students weren't in the auditorium, the crowd seemed larger than ever. The students had shed their usual black robes in favor of colorful and varied attire, which made Atticus sigh with appreciation as he scanned the vibrant faces. "Hey, Harry, over here!" Fleur, Delacour called out, waving her delicate arms as she spotted them. As expected, Fleur wore a long silk dress from the Fengya Wizard clothing store. Her exquisite features and the sparkling diamonds on her dress made her the most breathtaking presence among the girls, as if she were radiating a flawless white light. As she moved gracefully, the crowd parted for her, and the boys couldn't tear their eyes away. As Fleur passed Atticus, she lifted her chin, accentuating her graceful neck. She resisted the urge to glance at Atticus Blaine and went straight to Harry, ignoring his protests as she took his arm affectionately. "You look so handsome tonight, Harry." Harry's expression flickered with discomfort, and he let out a small grunt. He initially tried to free his arm from Fleur's grip, but stopped when he noticed Cedric in the crowd with Cho Chang. Suddenly, he didn't feel like struggling anymore. "Oh, you look good too," he managed to say. Fleur also noticed Hermione and was surprised to see how presentable the usually unassuming girl looked. As for Ron, Fleur completely overlooked him. Atticus and Ludo made their way to the front of the auditorium, where all the faculty and staff were gathered. Professor Dumbledore was conversing with Professor Karkaroff and Madame Maxime. They noticed Atticus and Ludo approaching. After exchanging pleasantries with the senior officials of the Ministry of Magic, Karkaroff turned to Atticus with a sly expression. "What's going on, Atticus? Did I get the date wrong?" Karkaroff bared his yellow teeth in feigned surprise, glancing at the dim auditorium and the restless students. "Is this where we're celebrating Christmas?" After kissing Madame Maxime's hand, adorned with opal rings, and nodding to Dumbledore, Atticus cleared his throat and used his wand to amplify his voice. "Now please, all students line up and follow the professors. We are heading to the venue for the Christmas banquet." The noise in the room swelled as students saw Professor Blaine and Professor Dumbledore leading the way to the foyer. Madame Maxime and Professor Karkaroff followed, looking puzzled, as they all exited the castle together. Outside, the world was still blanketed in ice and snow, with a biting wind. Without the castle walls to shield them from the cold, the young wizards, dressed in their various cool outfits, shivered. Many of the gentlemen gallantly offered their robes to those in need. Atticus Blaine draped his coat over his female companions. "What on earth are you doing?" Fleur, who hailed from Beauxbatons, was particularly sensitive to the cold. Despite her discomfort, she had no choice but to trudge through the snow with the rest of the group. The biting cold stripped her of her usual grace, and she clung to Harry for warmth. "I have no idea," Harry muttered, noticing Ron as he removed his dress robe to wrap it around Hermione. Torn between following suit and keeping warm himself, Harry hesitated. Just then, Professor Atticus Blaine, who was leading the way, suddenly stopped and turned to them with a cheerful expression. "Here we are." The young wizards, who had been trying to burrow into their clothes for warmth, looked up. To their astonishment, they found themselves standing on the shore of the Black Lake, now frozen solid. Their faces reflected a mix of shock and confusion. End of this chapter. Chapter 707, The Ice and Snow Castle. In the desolate world, the wind howled fiercely, carrying snowflakes that swept across the barren landscape. The young wizards by the Black Lake were weighed down by the force of the storm, unable to lift their heads. Despite the biting wind and snow stinging their eyes, they squinted painfully, searching the completely frozen lake for a place to gather, eat, and dance. Yet, under the dim light emanating from the castle, they found nothing on the lake's surface. "What's going on, Albus Atticus?" Even Mrs. Maxim, known for her composure, couldn't contain her frustration as she questioned the two men. "Indeed, ma'am," Atticus Blaine replied with a smile. "Initially, we planned to decorate the auditorium to celebrate this memorable day. However, I felt it lacked innovation. Inspired by some of Beauxbaton's Christmas traditions and the icy environment where Armstrong resides, I had an idea." "Don't hold back, Atticus," Karkaroff interjected, unusually fair in his comment. "Otherwise, I'm afraid the hospital at Hogwarts wouldn't be able to accommodate so many young wizards." "Let's see," Atticus nodded, then turned to Dumbledore. "Join me, Headmaster. It's a bit challenging for me alone." "Oh, of course," Dumbledore replied, his silver beard fluttering as he smiled. Under the astonished gaze of everyone, Atticus and Dumbledore skillfully leaped onto the ice. They didn't allow anyone the chance to ask further questions. Instead, they each drew their wands, turned their backs to the crowd, and walked towards the center of the lake, disappearing into the swirling snow and ice. "Are they out of their minds?" Ron exclaimed, staring in disbelief at the oppressive darkness over the lake. "In this freezing weather, if they fall in, they're done for. What are they trying to do?" No one could answer Ron's question. Even Hermione was baffled, huddled in Ron's robe, shivering from the cold, her eyelashes frosted. "Listen." The 5 minutes of waiting felt torturous. Although he didn't want to get too close to Fleur, Harry, shivering from the cold, found himself standing near her. Of course, he had no romantic intentions. He just hoped that whatever whimsical ideas Professors Dumbledore and Blaine had, they would conclude soon. Just as the young wizards were about to lose hope, Neville, supporting Ginny, seemed to sense something and suddenly exclaimed. His voice cut sharply through the dull whistling of the wind and snow. The young wizards strained their ears, eager to catch any news from the Black Lake. "Look, the ground is shaking." Dean pointed to his feet, exclaiming in surprise. More and more young wizards noticed the ground beneath them trembling slightly. On the lake's shore, a row of weeping willows swayed under the increasing turbulence, the accumulated snow on their branches cascading down with each tremor. "What's happening, Severus? What are they planning?" Karkaroff demanded, his voice stern as he brandished his wand. But Professor Snape remained silent, ignoring him, his eyes squinting towards the center of the Black Lake. Suddenly, from the center of the Black Lake, a place shrouded in darkness, an icy blue light flashed. Then, like thunder in summer, a rumbling roar swept outwards from the lake in all directions. Strong winds erupted from the center, disrupting the original path of the wind and snow. Rumble, The roar was deafening, and the icy blue light at the center of the black lake grew ever more intense. Silhouettes of two figures, one tall and one short, could be seen nearly 100 feet apart on the lake, each raising glowing wands. "There is a pillar," Cedric shouted, holding Cho Chang tightly to shield her from the fierce wind. He was pointing towards the lake. "There is a pillar growing out of the ice." "Not a pillar." Harry, with his extraordinary eyesight, strained to see through the darkness. He corrected Cedric, shouting to Hermione and Ron beside him, "It's a tower, the spire of a castle, rising from the ice." As Harry spoke, the movement intensified. Like the birth of the universe, the icy blue light suddenly flared before Professor Blaine and Professor Dumbledore, rolling outward like a tangible force. This stunning, enchanting light turned the cold, desolate night as bright as day for a moment. Rumble! The entire Black Lake trembled, but the little wizards no longer screamed in surprise. They were stunned, numbed by the unimaginable sight before them. Another castle, mirroring the main structure of Hogwarts, emerged from the ice like a growing crop. With each breath, the castle on the lake rose dozens of feet higher. Its walls, made entirely of deformed ice blocks, lacked the intricate details of the real Hogwarts castle, such as carvings and window sashes, yet its beauty was breathtaking. The ice blocks forming the walls were so pure they gleamed with an ice-blue light, appearing almost unreal. The rumbling continued, and the little wizard's eyes followed the Bourne castle, their heads tilting back as it rose. Meanwhile, other Hogwarts faculty on the shore sprang into action. Professor McGonagall, a proud smile on her face, deftly wielded her wand. The ice on the lake's shore began to melt, forming exquisitely shaped animals. The lion of Gryffindor, the eagle of Ravenclaw, the badger of Hufflepuff, and the serpent of Slytherin appeared one after another. Additionally, Professor McGonagall conjured reindeer, squirrels, unicorns, and other creatures. Once formed, these ice creatures galloped towards the ice castle, their calls echoing across the lake, some clear and high-pitched, others low and resonant. "Oh, it's my turn!" Professor Flitwick exclaimed excitedly in his sharp voice. He produced a bag from which little fairies and elves, resembling the goddess of love, emerged. They formed a galaxy and soared towards the ice castle. "Go, go!" Professor Sprout encouraged with a smile, scattering what appeared to be plant seeds onto the ice. The seeds sprouted immediately upon contact, drawn to the powerful magic emanating from the castle. They raced towards it, clinging to the ice walls, and soon bright purple flowers bloomed. Snape, with a reluctant expression, retrieved a glass bottle from his robes containing a silver-gray liquid. With a tap of his wand, the liquid expanded, pouring endlessly from the bottle to form a vast ocean in mid-air. These silver-gray streams emitted a pleasant aroma as they flowed towards the castle, creating a fountain before its gate. Almost every professor showcased their unique talents. Professor Sinistra used her wand to conjure shooting stars, adding to the magical spectacle. Stars streaked across the night sky, embedding themselves in the flawless, sky-blue ice walls of the castle. Their golden light made the beautiful ice castle appear even more dreamlike. At that moment, in the real Hogwarts castle, a multitude of ghosts burst forth from the entrance hall. Peeves, Nearly Headless Nick, the Fat Friar, the Grey Lady, and many others who never left the castle joined the spectacle. The ghosts soared over the grounds and above the heads of the young wizards, laughing joyfully as they rushed into the ice castle. As the tremors finally subsided, the young wizards gazed up at the ice castle, which transformed the night sky into a mesmerizing icy blue. They were so awestruck that they couldn't find the words to speak. It was so wonderful, so astonishing. Everyone witnessing this scene, including the castle's creators, felt the same emotion in their hearts. This ice castle was truly a magnificent work of art. It was as if they were witnessing the brilliance of a fairy tale brought to life. "I love magic so much," Harry sighed with heartfelt admiration as he watched Professor Dumbledore and Professor Atticus Blaine, both smiling, come into view. End of this chapter. Chapter 708, An Unexpected Tip. Casting spells on the ice, Atticus Blaine demonstrated his exceptional transformation skills and immense magical power to create a magnificent ice and snow castle. While it would have been challenging for Atticus to perform such a feat alone, with Dumbledore's guidance, it became a seamless task. As Atticus returned to the group, he noticed the awestruck expressions on the faces of those gathered on the shore and smiled with satisfaction. "How's it going? It's quite impressive, isn't it?" he asked. Karkaroff, who had previously voiced his dissatisfaction, found himself speechless. In response to Atticus's question, he could only nod in agreement. "That's amazing, Albus," Madame Maxime exclaimed sincerely. "It's like a miracle." "It's an honor to receive your recognition, dear Olympe," Dumbledore replied happily. Atticus then turned to the young wizards, who were so stunned they couldn't speak. He waved them over, saying, "What are you waiting for, everyone? Go and warm up in your castle." The anticipated heated discussion was absent as the young wizards descended onto the ice one by one. Their eyes were fixed on the castle, and they remained in a daze until they stood before the magical ice structure. Only then did they finally come to their senses. Inside, they discovered that the lifelike little animals Professor McGonagall had conjured were already frolicking in and around the ice castle. Several reindeer pranced joyfully beside the silver fountain created by Professor Snape, occasionally letting out melodious cries. Little fairies and cupids flitted through the majestic ice-blue palace gates, following the ghosts that floated everywhere. The young wizards followed the professors into the magnificent palace, exclaiming repeatedly at the sights before them. The interior was vast, resembling a grand auditorium. Despite being an ice castle, it was unexpectedly warm and bright. Harry looked up to see golden flames, each the size of a fist, forming the emblems of the 4 houses suspended above. The warmth in the palace emanated from these 4 flaming banners. Above the banners hung an extraordinarily spectacular crystal chandelier composed of thousands of diamond-shaped ice crystals, purer than the most flawless gems. The chandelier emitted an ice-blue light, leaving even Draco, accustomed to luxury, in a trance. The palace was adorned with numerous ice sculptures shaped like plants, all incredibly lifelike. Many of Professor McGonagall's little squirrels perched on these sculptures, tilting their heads and blinking at the young wizards. This adorable scene caused many girls to squeal with excitement. "It's amazing!" Hermione exclaimed, covering her mouth as tears of joy glistened in her eyes. "I can't believe magic can do this." Similar sentiments spread among the students as they gradually regained their composure. Fleur's sister, Gabrielle, excitedly left the Beauxbatons group to stroke the mane of a lion walking through the hall. She dashed under a tree to play with the squirrels on the ice, her laughter ringing like silver bells. Colin, who had unexpectedly been invited to the event, was eager to capture the moment with his camera. For the first time, he felt there was something more worthy of photographing than Harry Potter. Fleur, standing next to Harry, gazed dreamily at Atticus Blaine, who was chatting and laughing with Madame Maxime and Professor Karkaroff. Her blue eyes were filled with deep admiration for the enchanting ice castle. The ice castle had captivated the young wizards so completely that they paid no mind to the upcoming dance party. As the crowd continued to admire the icy structure, Atticus Blaine raised his wand once more. A series of rustling sounds echoed through the castle, and in the grand hall, small round tables with 2 chairs each emerged beside the intricately arranged ice-carved plants. "Don't just stand there, everyone," Atticus's voice resonated through the empty hall. "Please take your seats. Let's arrange the tables between dance partners. Of course, those attending the banquet alone can share a table. Warriors and your dance partners, please proceed to the guest of honor table." After Atticus repeated his instructions, the students began to move. "Come on, Ron," Hermione whispered softly, gently tugging on Ron's sleeve. "Okay," Ron replied, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He avoided looking directly at Hermione, but noticed that after Cho Chang, Daphne, and Fleur had all taken their partner's arms, he coughed a few times, straightened his posture, and gracefully placed his right fist on his lower abdomen. Hermione, ignoring Fred and George's teasing winks, took Ron's arm. All the arrangements had only been rehearsed in Atticus's mind, leaving even the faculty and staff somewhat bewildered. With a smile, Atticus guided everyone to their seats. He noticed Professor Moody standing in a daze beneath an ice pine tree and approached him. Like everyone else, the ice castle had left Professor Moody in awe. Yet, as he gazed at the magnificent structure, a flicker of loneliness occasionally crossed his eyes, as if he were suppressing deep emotions. When he saw Hermione walking with Ron, he was suddenly taken aback, his scarred face filled with astonishment. "Granger made Weasley her dance partner?" Professor Moody blurted out, his voice tinged with horror and confusion. "Is there anything wrong with that, Professor Moody?" Atticus's meaningful look snapped Moody back to reality. "Oh, it's nothing," Moody replied, taking a few deep breaths. He cast a long, thoughtful glance at Ron and Hermione, then at Atticus, before walking away silently. The warriors and their dance partners sat alongside the three headmasters, Atticus, and representatives from the Ministry of Magic. Percy and Ludo Bagman flanked Harry and Fleur. As soon as Harry sat down, Percy leaned in. "I received your letter, Harry. I didn't write back because I was coming to Hogwarts for the banquet on behalf of Mr. Crouch. Why are you suddenly so interested in Mr. Crouch's recent activities?" "Let's talk about it later, Percy," Harry replied quietly, casting a guilty glance at Professor Blaine, who was seated a few places away. The commotion gradually subsided as everyone turned their attention to the guest table, which was conspicuously empty, not even a plate in sight. What were they supposed to eat? Just then, a scream erupted from among the young wizards. "Look at the ground!" The panicked shout drew everyone's attention downward for the first time. Amidst the many wonders of the ice castle, they had overlooked the floor beneath their feet. The ground was a sheet of pure crystal, and under the ice-blue light, they could glimpse the scene beneath the frozen lake. The reason for the earlier scream became clear. A massive shadow loomed beneath them. "It's the giant squid from the Black Lake," someone quickly deduced, identifying the behemoth beneath their feet. The giant squid in the Black Lake is one of Hogwarts' most famous campus legends. Not all young wizards have had the chance to encounter this creature up close. Some students, filled with excitement, left their seats and lay on the ground, eager to catch a glimpse of the massive squid. Ron, seated at the guest table, was also captivated by the spectacle. Although he remained seated, his eyes were fixed downward. Suddenly, a multitude of humanoid shadows swam beneath Ron's seat, heading towards the giant squid as if to negotiate with it. "What on earth are those?" Ron exclaimed in terror, unable to contain his fear. "Keep calm, Mr. Weasley," Professor McGonagall instructed, her expression stern. She offered no answer to Ron's question. Hermione, who had also noticed the strange shadows, was initially planning to remind Ron that every champion and their dance partner was under scrutiny. However, upon hearing Ron's question, she instinctively began to ponder the answer. As a term surfaced in her mind, Hermione's expression shifted dramatically. End of this chapter. Chapter 709, The Warrior and the Dance Partner. The sudden appearance of the giant squid, followed by other mysterious creatures, captivated everyone's attention. Eyes widened in astonishment as they gazed at the spectacle unfolding before them. The saying, "the elephant is invisible," seemed apt, for while the entirety of the colossal squid remained elusive, the creatures that followed were clearly visible. These beings, with human upper bodies and faces paired with fishtails, resembled the mermaids of Muggle mythology. However, any association with beauty was quickly dispelled. Through the ice, one could discern their iron-gray skin and long, unkempt dark green hair. Their eyes glowed a sickly yellow, matching their incomplete yellowed teeth. Around their necks hung pebbles strung together with thick ropes. "Mermaids!" The senior students whispered to their classmates as the golden menu conjured by Professor Blaine floated to each table. "Mermaids," Ron murmured, leaning slightly towards Hermione. "What are they?" Expecting an explanation, he was met with silence. Turning to Hermione, he found her frowning, her gaze fixed on the mermaids, deep in thought. "What's wrong, Hermione? What did you find?" he asked. "Oh, it's nothing," Hermione replied, her voice trailing off as the mermaids finally persuaded the giant squid to leave the wizard's celebration undisturbed. Her eyes still sparkled with contemplation. "I was just thinking about mermaids," she began, but quickly stopped herself, aware of the presence of other warriors and Ministry of Magic officials nearby. Meanwhile, Harry listened as Professor Dumbledore announced the dishes on the menu, each one materializing before him. Following suit, Harry ordered a Hungarian red wine goulash. The earlier chill and surprise had left the young wizards famished, and they eagerly began to eat. Those at the guest table, however, remained mindful of their dining etiquette, conscious of their image. While the banquet offered a delightful meal and a rare spectacle for the attendees, the organizers had no such luxury. Dumbledore's status and seniority allowed him to remain unburdened by these concerns, but Atticus Blaine could not afford such a reprieve. Throughout the dinner, he maintained a polite smile, listening to Ludo Bagman's incessant chatter. He and Dumbledore should have informed the Ministry of Magic about the dinner plans earlier, allowing them to arrange for a daily profit reporter to document the creation of the ice castle. Atticus also kept an eye on whether the young warriors at the guest of honor table and his colleagues at the faculty table were enjoying their meals. To Atticus's surprise, not all the warriors basked in the admiration they deserved. In fact, most seemed less than thrilled. The true Hogwarts champion, Cedric Diggory, appeared to be in high spirits, especially in the company of the Asian girl from Ravenclaw. Throughout the meal, the two conversed quietly, their heads close together. Cho Chang, gentle and beautiful, was frequently amused by Cedric, whose handsome features often softened with open admiration as he gazed at her. Both students were part of the physical education class, and after teaching them for so long, Atticus had noticed the budding affection between them. For a long time, Atticus Blaine had observed the dynamics at Hogwarts with a keen eye. He recalled a particular class where Harry had secretly glanced at Cho Chang 48 times, much to Hermione's chagrin. She had cast him numerous disapproving looks, which Harry seemed oblivious to. Even now, as he ate with his head lowered, Harry's green eyes would occasionally flicker towards Cedric and Cho Chang. Fleur, on the other hand, paid little attention to Harry's subtle actions. She, too, was lost in her own thoughts. While Harry discreetly watched Cho, Fleur feigned interest in Madame Maxime's words, though her mind was elsewhere. Her expression was no longer one of anger, but rather of quiet resentment. In many ways, Fleur and Harry were alike, making them seem well-head. From the messages Fleur had asked Harry to relay, Atticus understood her intentions. By associating with the most famous boy at Hogwarts, Fleur sought to affirm her own allure. Atticus recognized her efforts. Meanwhile, the atmosphere between Hermione and Ron was equally complex. Hermione had shed more than just her school bag. As dinner progressed, her gaze towards Ron grew increasingly composed. The issue lay with Ron. The young man struggled with self-doubt, appearing restless with every movement. The stares from the younger students and the presence of the dazzling Hermione beside him only added to his pressure. In Atticus's view, Ron Weasley was not without merit, but his strengths were internal, overshadowed by the more conspicuous talents of his friends and siblings. Growing up in such an environment, Ron often compared his weaknesses to others' strengths, exacerbating his anxiety. His long-standing feelings of neglect had ingrained a deep-seated inferiority complex. The best remedy would be consistent encouragement and admiration to gradually build his self-confidence. Unfortunately, in the company of Harry and Hermione, Ron often felt overlooked. The conversation between Victor Krum and Daphne Greengrass was notably cordial. As a world-renowned Quidditch star, Victor knew how to maintain his public image, and Daphne, with her Greengrass lineage, was equally adept. They maintained a respectful distance, engaging in polite conversation. Yet, Victor seemed to share a similar distraction as Harry and Fleur, with his gaze occasionally drifting towards Hermione. What puzzled Atticus was Victor's apparent avoidance of him. Did the young man harbor such a deep-seated bias against him? The dinner was lavish, but once their appetites were sated, attention shifted from the food to Professor Blaine. Atticus noticed even Madame Maxime responding to Hagrid's eager glances. With a slight smile, he conferred with Dumbledore and rose from his seat. With a wave of his wand, the tables slowly sank into the floor, and a grand stage emerged. Beneath an ice pine tree, a pure piano appeared, its keys moving on their own, filling the hall with soothing, melancholic dance music. "So," Atticus addressed the visibly nervous champions around him, "ladies and gentlemen, let's get excited." Chapter 710. Youth. As Professor Blaine announced the start of the dance, the piano he conjured began to play soothing, melancholic tunes that filled the vast, dreamlike hall. The extravagant chandelier hanging from the palace ceiling cast a pale golden light, illuminating the grand stage below. Cedric and Cho Chang exchanged sweet glances, smiled gently, and naturally held hands as they left their seats. They were the first couple to make their way to the stage. Following them were Victor and Daphne, who walked calmly under the envious gazes of many onlookers. By this time, Harry began to feel a twinge of nervousness. He suddenly realized that since agreeing to attend the ball with Fleur, he hadn't practiced his admittedly poor dancing skills even once. Although he had low expectations for the Christmas ball, he certainly didn't want to embarrass himself in front of everyone. "Don't be nervous, Harry," Fleur said, perhaps sensing his anxiety. Harry, who was about to seek reassurance from Hermione, turned to Fleur. Her expression was unusually kind, and she smiled at him with understanding, lacking her usual air of superiority. "I'll show you how," Fleur offered with a smile. "Oh, thank you," Harry replied, exhaling deeply. He suddenly found Fleur less annoying and nodded appreciatively. Laughter erupted from the students eagerly awaiting the appearance of the champions and their partners. Harry, having circled the guest table, noticed that the laughter was directed at Hermione and Ron. He turned to check on them, knowing Ron was likely more anxious than he was. Fleur, however, held his arm firmly, almost dragging him forward. As the dinner progressed, Ron's mind began to feel numb. He was both eager and terrified of the dance to come. While Hermione ate gracefully, Ron kept glancing at the other champion's attire on the podium. Despite knowing his retro outfit was the least impressive, he couldn't help but feel self-conscious. When Professor Blaine signaled them to take the stage, Ron's mind went blank. He only stood up after Hermione's prompt, but his legs felt unsteady. As soon as he rose, he nearly collapsed. Hermione, noticing Ron's predicament, quickly pushed her chair aside and supported his arm. "For Merlin's sake, Ron," she exclaimed. It was impossible not to feel nervous under so many watchful eyes, but Ron's state made Hermione forget her own anxiety. As they moved forward, Hermione made a quick decision. She leaned in and whispered, "It's nothing to be afraid of, Ron. It's only 2 minutes." "Yes, I understand," Ron replied, perhaps finding courage in Hermione's sincere brown eyes. Pale and breathless like a fish out of water, he finally managed to control his legs. "I just felt numb in my feet." The other 3 pairs of champions had already reached the stage, and Hermione realized she and Ron were lagging behind. She took his arm to offer support as they followed. Ron wasn't sure how he ended up in the spotlight. The guest stand was less than 40 feet from the stage, yet the path felt like the longest he had ever walked. Atticus Blaine knew that the most important thing he needed to do now was to remain calm and composed. He couldn't afford to make himself or Hermione the subject of ridicule. He tried his best to avoid looking at the stage or meeting the eyes of those eagerly waiting for his appearance. Yet, the gazes filled with mockery, indifference, and doubt seemed to pierce through him from every direction, clouding his vision and unsettling his thoughts. The pressure of being in the spotlight was far from the glamorous experience he had imagined. It was much more comfortable being part of the audience. "Put your arms around my waist, Ron." Hermione's soft voice broke through the haze of his thoughts, bringing him back to the present. As she stood opposite him, her words mingled with the melodious music, and Atticus finally regained some clarity. The moment his trembling hand touched her waist, his first thought was how soft it felt. The sensation made him dizzy, as if his blood was rushing through his veins, setting him ablaze. He glanced at Hermione, noticing the pink tint on her fair cheeks. Her hair shimmered under the spotlight, and the lilac gauze of her tube top accentuated her graceful curves, more striking than the fire dragon from the first event of the competition. Atticus had never realized just how beautiful Hermione was, and the realization was so overwhelming that he dared not look any longer. His chaotic thoughts caused his unfamiliar dance steps to falter, and he stumbled slightly. Fortunately, Hermione's arm provided the support he needed, preventing a more embarrassing mishap. Suddenly, a sneer, faint yet piercing, reached his ears from the side of the stage. Against his will, Atticus glanced in that direction. It was Malfoy's cronies, Crabbe and Goyle, covering their mouths and shaking with laughter. What was so amusing? Atticus's face flushed with embarrassment. Those 2 couldn't even find dance partners. He tried to push thoughts of Crabbe and Goyle aside, but the cold jeers from some Slytherins grew louder in his mind, overshadowing even Hermione's image. "Don't get distracted, Atticus. Ignore them. They're just jealous," he urged himself, trying to focus on Hermione and the dance. But his eyes kept wandering to the audience, the other pairs of champions and their partners, and the professors on stage. Were they all watching him? Did they think he looked ridiculous in his outfit? Did they believe it was a mistake for the dazzling Hermione, one of Hogwarts' champions, to be with him? Hermione, noticing Atticus's wandering eyes, his furrowed brow, and the sweat beading on his forehead, could guess what he was thinking. Yet she chose not to remind him to refocus. Instead, she looked at him with gentle eyes. Atticus might be clumsy, but he was also smart. He might be vain, but he was kind. The boy in front of her had been her friend for nearly 4 years. He had inadvertently helped her overcome the fear and isolation she felt as a Muggle girl entering the magical world. He had brought her joy and many touching moments. In their second year, when Malfoy had called her a mudblood, it was Atticus who stood by her side. She never forgot that it was Ron who was the first to rush out and defend her against Malfoy. Of course, she also remembered how angry she felt, unable to sleep for many nights because of the incident with Banban and Ron's indifferent attitude after she became a warrior some time ago. She knew that the boy standing before her secretly liked her. She had once fantasized about the possibility of being with Ron in the future, thinking it might not be a bad choice. Yet, deep down, there was always a lingering hesitation. Professor Atticus Blaine's words gave Hermione the courage to confront her uncertainties about Ron. It was a kind of reluctance on her part. She realized she shouldn't just let things happen naturally. She needed to respect her true feelings more and listen to her inner voice. As the melancholy music finally came to an end, Ron breathed a sigh of relief. His attention returned to Hermione, but the moment their eyes met, he was taken aback. Before he could say anything, Hermione spoke. "Thank you, Ron," she said with a smile, looking at the big-hearted boy in front of her. End of this chapter. Chapter 7 or 11, Youth Part. The 2-minute lead dance felt like an eternity of torture for Ron. Each second dragged on painfully. Initially, he was thrilled by Hermione's stunning appearance and secretly delighted to be one of the focal points on stage. However, his attention soon shifted entirely to the audience's gaze. He knew not everyone harbored ill intentions, yet his mind spiraled uncontrollably. Did he pick that outfit from the trash? He looks ridiculous, but Hermione Granger, she looks truly extraordinary. Why did she choose Weasley as her dance partner? These thoughts echoed in his mind, mingling with the gentle, melodious music. Ron wanted to silence these voices, but he didn't know where to begin. Even if Hermione wasn't a champion, she was still the brightest student at Hogwarts, adored by many professors. Yet, she wasn't as famous as Harry, nor did she possess Harry's exceptional Quidditch skills. Ron felt he wasn't even as resilient as Neville, who, despite enduring countless glares in Professor Atticus Blaine's physical education class, never considered giving up. Ron saw himself as an ordinary person, devoid of talent or renown. Though he often imagined himself as different, a voice inside reminded him of his ordinariness. As the final note faded in the ice castle, Ron's forehead glistened with sweat, and his back was drenched. He wanted to apologize to Hermione, aware that his clumsy steps had repeatedly trodden on her priceless dress, leaving footprints. But before he could speak, "Thank you, Ron," Hermione said, her voice filled with warmth. Their eyes met under the soft golden light. Hermione smiled at Ron, and he gazed back at her, bewildered. In that moment, their hearts seemed to connect, revealing the deepest thoughts within each other. Ron's body trembled, his eyes brimming with pain and regret. He realized he had lost something invaluable, far more precious than fame or talent. Time seemed to stand still, and Ron felt an overwhelming urge to embrace Hermione and cry. At the very least, he wanted to confess, "I like you," he longed to say. Hermione, sensing Ron's inner turmoil, smiled gently, her pure brown eyes filled with understanding and compassion. She squeezed his hand softly, conveying a silent promise, "We will be good friends for life." With that, she slowly released his hand. "Can I dance with you?" a voice interrupted. As the song ended, a more upbeat tune began to play. The young wizards below eagerly flooded the dance floor. Lavender, wearing a pink gauze dress embroidered with lavender flowers and gold thread, navigated through the crowd, approaching Ron from behind. She glanced at Hermione nervously before looking at Ron with anticipation. What? Ron, still lost in his sorrow, was surprised by Lavender's sudden appearance. "Oh no, I think you danced wonderfully," Lavender exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "Go on, Ron, why refuse?" Hermione encouraged, slightly taken aback by her roommate's eagerness, but not surprised by her request. She smiled, her eyes forming crescents, and gently nudged Ron toward Lavender. As Lavender took his hand, Ron's eyes remained vacant. He glanced back at Hermione, but she had already turned away, heading off to rest. His sadness found no outlet. Ron glanced at Lavender once more. Her skirt was intricately embroidered with gold thread patterns, and her hair accessories were woven with the same shimmering material. Though her appearance was extravagant, it was far from unattractive. What truly captivated Ron was the sparkle in her eyes as she looked at him, making him feel buoyant. "Do you really think I danced well just now?" he asked. "Oh, absolutely," Lavender replied, gazing at Ron with admiration. "All right then," Ron muttered, his body already swaying gently with Lavender's, his dance steps appearing more composed. There is no rehearsal for the end of youth. Before you realize it, each person's destiny diverges in different directions. I have to apologize to you, Harry. On their way to the stage, Harry and Fleur were undoubtedly the couple drawing the most attention. Fleur was the most beautiful girl at Hogwarts, while Harry was the most famous boy. This year's Triwizard Tournament had shifted some focus to the champions, but Harry Potter remained the darling of the British wizarding community. As the music played, Cedric and Cho Chang gradually captivated everyone's attention. The handsome Hufflepuff champion and the gentle Ravenclaw girl were as striking as any couple, their synchronized and graceful dance steps resembling elves dancing among flowers. Not only did the students in the audience admire them, but even Harry, on stage, found his attention drawn to Cedric and Cho Chang, leaving him little time to worry about Ron's awkward steps. They are such a perfect match, Harry thought sadly, glancing at Cedric and Cho Chang, who moved lightly and gazed at each other as if they were melting together. Cho Chang's decision to be with Cedric was indeed a wise choice. Harry felt a pang of despair, as if he had been utterly defeated by Cedric. Cedric had bested him on the Quidditch field and now in winning Cho Chang's favor. No, this couldn't even be called a competition, as Harry hadn't had the chance to speak. Harry didn't care about the whispers and stares as much as Ron did, but the dance before him left him feeling bored. Whether it was Cedric and Cho Chang spinning gracefully or Fleur, who kept glancing at the guest of honor's table, the scene was tiresome. The music's melody grew more urgent, signaling the climax before the end. Harry sighed in relief, his mind filled with the thought that this ordeal was finally nearing its conclusion. However, Fleur suddenly spoke. "Oh, it's okay," Harry whispered instinctively. "I don't care." He didn't realize what he had said until the words were out. He immediately looked into Fleur's eyes and saw her staring at him with a raised eyebrow, seemingly surprised. "Okay," Fleur said, carefully guiding Harry's unfamiliar steps to match her own pace. After murmuring something, she smiled at him. "Then maybe I should say thank you." Harry's expression flickered with discomfort. He understood what Fleur meant. He knew she hadn't truly wanted to dance with him at the ball, yet he had come. To be honest, even now, Harry wasn't sure why he was standing on this stage. Perhaps it was because Hermione and Ron were there, or maybe it was his stubborn refusal to admit defeat. "You like that girl, don't you?" Fleur's sudden question startled Harry again. He looked at her smiling face and realized she was referring to Cho Chang. "Why didn't you invite her? Were you rejected?" Fleur's question pierced Harry's heart like a knife, causing a painful twinge. He hesitated, unable to speak, but the darkness in his eyes confirmed Fleur's suspicion. "Tell me about it, Harry," Fleur pressed, showing no intention of letting him off the hook. She seemed particularly interested in the topic and asked with enthusiasm. Harry wasn't sure why he felt compelled to share his thoughts with Fleur. Perhaps he simply wanted to seize the moment to express the bitterness that weighed on his heart. "That's what I planned." Harry's breath became uneven, and a faint blush crept onto his cheeks as he continued. "But there was no time." "Oh," Fleur's eyelashes fluttered. When you meet a girl you like, Harry, be brave. If you hesitate, you'll miss your chance. Although she spoke with conviction, her expression suddenly turned oddly blank. Harry, feeling a slight pang of emotion, wondered what had caused Fleur's change in demeanor. But then, she broke into a playful smile and winked at him. Since you helped me, let me return the favor. The music came to a halt, and people began to flood the dance floor. What are you going to do? Harry asked, surprised and unsure of Fleur's intentions. Be brave this time, Fleur replied with a gentle smile. She glided gracefully past Hermione and Ron, and under Harry's anxious gaze, approached Cedric and Cho Chang. She lifted her head to meet Cedric's surprised eye and flashed a radiant smile. Hey, Diggory, can I have this dance with you? End of this chapter. Chapter 712, Youth, Part 1. The moment Fleur spoke, Harry nearly jumped out of his skin. He never anticipated that Fleur would actually follow through after expressing her desire to help him. However, Fleur had already captured the attention of Cedric and Cho Chang, leaving Harry with little recourse. He could have pulled her back, or simply turned around and left, but something in Fleur's words had struck a chord with him. He stood there awkwardly, yet a flicker of hope began to stir within him. You want to ask me to dance? Cedric asked, surprised, though his gaze remained fixed on Cho Chang. When he noticed the wariness and rejection in Cho's eyes directed at Fleur, Cedric's heart skipped a beat. Oh, sorry, I feel, a little tired. But Fleur seemed oblivious to Cedric's reluctance. She knew precisely who held the power to decide, so she turned her attention to the Asian girl with a gentle and refined demeanor, offering a light smile. This dance, like the Triwizard Tournament, is meant to foster mutual understanding between the three schools, isn't it? Cho Chang hesitated, glancing at Cedric, who appeared innocent. After a moment's contemplation, she nodded slowly. Okay, Cedric, I'll wait for you down there. With that, she turned and walked off the stage, intending to have a drink and rest for a while. Cedric hadn't expected Cho Chang to agree. He was momentarily dazed, but Fleur quickly took his hand and led him to the other side of the stage. Witnessing this, Harry's heart leapt into his throat. To create an opportunity for him, Fleur had actually drawn Cedric away from Cho Chang. He was still hesitating when Fleur, holding Cedric, suddenly turned and gave him a stern look. This look shattered Harry's indecision, and without further thought, he sprang forward and called out to Cho Chang, who was about to leave the stage. Hey, wait! Harry rushed after Cho Chang, calling to her breathlessly. His heart pounded wildly, sending a rush of blood to his head, making him feel dizzy. What? Oh, Harry? Cho Chang turned around, surprised to see Harry calling her. Yet, she seemed to have anticipated something, as her face flushed a visible shade of pink. Her hands intertwined nervously. Cho Chang was wearing a light yellow cheongsam that perfectly accentuated her figure. Her long black hair, cascading like a waterfall, was elegantly styled into a bun at the back of her head, complementing her gentle demeanor. The previous dance with Cedric had left a fine sheen of sweat on her temples, but Harry, standing so close, caught a whiff of her sweet scent, causing his heart to race once more. It was like tasting the clear, sweet water of a mountain spring. Dance with me, Harry blurted out, not allowing himself a moment to reconsider, fearing he might turn and flee. I'm sorry, what did you say? Cho Chang asked, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes widening slightly. Would you like to dance with me? Harry repeated, his face flushed with embarrassment. He had come this far and was determined not to squander the opportunity. In truth, he felt a twinge of gratitude for attending the banquet with Fleur. Oh! Cho Chang exclaimed, clutching her chest as her breathing grew slightly erratic. She realized that Fleur's invitation to Cedric might not have been as simple as it seemed. Cho Chang would be lying to herself if she claimed she hadn't noticed Harry's silent gaze during gym class. Girls are particularly attuned to such attention. She had long been aware of Harry's frequent glances. Moreover, the eagerness in his green eyes was unmistakable. Cho Chang hadn't confided in anyone about this because, until now, she had dismissed it as a figment of her imagination, given that Harry hadn't made any real moves. Atticus Blaine stood silently, watching her, unable to move. By the time he realized that the renowned Harry Potter might secretly have feelings for her, another boy had already captured her heart. Logically, she shouldn't have agreed to Harry's request, but she hesitated. Shh, he could deceive others, but not herself. Deep down, she harbored some affection for Harry. "All right," she finally said. Harry, looking at the girl who never gave a clear reply, felt his heart grow cold with anxiety. Embarrassed and disappointed, he decided to give up. "I shouldn't have made unreasonable requests. Sorry." "Don't," she interrupted. Harry pursed his lips, ready to leave. But just as he was about to step away, Cho Chang suddenly came to her senses. She bit her lower lip lightly, her cheeks flushed with a hint of red, and nodded gently to Harry, despite her embarrassment. A wave of joy surged through Harry's heart. He stared at Cho Chang in disbelief, afraid it was all an illusion. "Are you serious?" "Oh no," he stammered excitedly. "You do?" This time, Harry was certain he wasn't mistaken. Cho Chang nodded again, biting her lower lip lightly. "I do, Harry." To Harry, her words were the most beautiful sound in the world. Amidst the cheerful music played by the ice piano and the scattered golden light, Harry finally held Cho Chang's slightly warm hand. It was the most wonderful feeling, as if all sadness and pain had vanished, leaving only joy in his heart. He even imagined that if he pulled out his wand and cast the Patronus charm, he could clear out Azkaban with his own strength. One of Harry's hands rested near Cho Chang's slender waist, while the other held her hand tightly. He gazed deeply at her face. Her long, black eyelashes flickered. Her fair skin had a slight blush. Her nose was straight, and her red lips stirred an uncontrollable impulse within him. But reason held him back. He knew he couldn't act on it. If he did, Cedric would likely rush over and punch him in the nose, and then he'd be infamous for sweeping the floor. In truth, if these were the only consequences, Harry might have been willing to try it out, to preserve the current happiness forever. But he refrained, knowing it would hurt Cho Chang, and she wouldn't be happy to see him act that way. Cho Chang looked away shyly, avoiding Harry's eager gaze. She didn't want him to see the pain in her eyes. "I was going to invite you." Just then, Dumbledore and Madame Maxime finished a dance symbolizing the friendship between Hogwarts and Beauxbatons. Hagrid, eager to see what was happening, approached and held Madame Maxime's hand, brushing past Harry. In his excitement, Hagrid accidentally knocked Harry off balance, causing him to stagger forward and catch Cho Chang in his arms. Well, Cho Chang was caught off guard by the unexpected embrace. She remained in Harry's arms, not breaking free immediately. The proximity allowed them to feel each other's breath. "Invite you to the dance," Harry began, but he could already sense a murderous intent from a certain direction behind him. He knew Cedric must have seen the scene and would rush over to defend his girl. The brief happiness quickly turned into a deep sense of foreboding. Harry realized that Cho Chang was about to leave him, and there was a high probability she would never return to his arms in this moment. As Harry pondered the situation, it felt as though a cold hand had gripped his heart, casting a shadow over his future. Yet, before they parted ways, he knew he had to tell her, at least that much. "I was going to invite you," Harry began hurriedly, holding his breath, "but Diggory beat me to it. I actually—" "I'm sorry, Harry," Cho Chang finally responded, meeting his gaze. She interrupted him, her eyes locked onto his, where the fire seemed to be fading. Her voice carried a hint of sadness. "I'm sorry." With those words, Cho gently pushed against Harry's chest, stepping out of his embrace. End of this chapter. Chapter 7:13, The Fleeting Beauty. As the music in the ice castle shifted to a more cheerful tune, the young wizards, who had been eagerly waiting, flooded onto the dance floor. With hearts full of youthful emotions and excitement, they embraced their partners and began to dance. The faculty and staff soon followed suit. Dumbledore invited Madame Maxime for a dance. Ludo Bagman approached Professor McGonagall, and Professors Sprout and Flitwick joined the dance floor together. Even Professor Moody, despite his usual stern demeanor, accepted Professor Sinistra's invitation. Mrs. Pince and Filch exchanged restrained smiles and walked arm in arm onto the dance floor. Percy watched Fred and Angelina dance with exaggerated movements. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if recalling someone. However, his reverie was interrupted by a sixth-grade girl who approached him with a respectful invitation. Percy accepted, and they made their way to the stage. At the faculty table, only Snape and Karkaroff remained unaccompanied. Despite the lively atmosphere, Both wore indifferent expressions, with a hint of disdain in their eyes. "We need to talk, Severus," Karkaroff said, casting a wary glance at Atticus Blaine, who was casting a spell to make soothing snowflakes fall from the ceiling. "There's nothing to discuss, Igor, if you're afraid," Snape replied impatiently. But Karkaroff didn't give him a chance to refuse. He grabbed Snape's sleeve and led him around the stage, disappearing behind the ice trees and out of the ice castle. Atticus noticed this exchange, but chose to ignore it. Recently, Karkaroff had been trying to speak with Snape about the frequent changes in the tattoo on his arm. Snape had reported everything to Dumbledore, who then informed Atticus. It seemed Karkaroff was planning to flee at the first sign of trouble, but neither Dumbledore nor Atticus were particularly concerned about his fate. The real issue was how to properly care for the young wizards from Durmstrang. Despite this, Snape only shared this information with Dumbledore and never mentioned it to Atticus. It wasn't a matter of trust. Snape simply didn't want to get involved with Voldemort. He seemed to harbor the illusion that he could remain uninvolved when Voldemort returned, believing that by keeping a low profile, he could ensure his safety. To this, Atticus could only shake his head and smile bitterly. This was a life-and-death struggle, and there was no escaping it. Atticus had realized this the moment he decided to return to Hogwarts after graduation. 2 rows of long tables appeared on either side of the beautiful Ice Castle Hall. With a wave of his wand, Atticus conjured an array of exquisite desserts and butterbeer on the tables. "Mr. Blaine," a timid and hopeful voice called from behind. Atticus turned to see Gabrielle Delacour, Fleur's younger sister. "What can I do for you, Miss Delacour?" Atticus asked with a smile, causing Gabrielle to blush. She pointed to an ice reindeer walking beneath an ice tree 20 feet away, her voice filled with anticipation. "Can I ride it, Mr. Blaine?" "Oh, of course, there's no problem," Atticus replied warmly. He gestured to the reindeer, which obediently trotted over, nuzzling Gabrielle's cheek affectionately before kneeling down to allow her to climb on. Atticus Blaine gently helped the little girl onto the back of the reindeer. With a swift whoosh, the reindeer dashed forward, carrying Gabrielle as it glided gracefully around the spacious hall. Her laughter echoed through every corner of the ice castle, drawing the attention of many curious young wizards. Inspired by the scene, they began to explore the hall, discovering the enchanting ice and snow creatures scattered throughout. George and Lee Jordan from Gryffindor even found themselves competing for the majestic lion, engaging in a playful tussle. The atmosphere in the ice castle was light and joyful. Atticus, caught up in the merriment, found himself humming along to the music played by the ice piano. With a flick of his wand, he summoned bundles of fireworks from the open bag he held, arranging them neatly on a long table for the young wizards to enjoy. Satisfied with his work, Atticus exhaled deeply and returned to his seat at the guest table, a beer in hand. Some students had already left the dance floor, gathering around the table to savor their meals and drinks. The fireworks were a hit, with students eagerly grabbing them. Atticus noticed Harry stepping off the stage, looking dejected, and heading towards Hermione, who was resting nearby. They exchanged a few words before quickly leaving the castle together. Atticus felt the weight of many eager eyes upon him. Earlier, the senior girls had refrained from approaching him, seeing him busy with preparations. But now, with his tasks complete, they began to muster the courage to approach him. After all, this was a rare opportunity, one not to be missed. As they hesitated, Fleur took the initiative. Leaving Cedric behind, she caught her breath and spotted Atticus sitting alone at the guest table. Without hesitation, she gracefully descended from the stage, lifting her skirt slightly as she trotted over to him. "You mentioned you wouldn't mind dancing with someone else at the ball, right?" Fleur asked, her beautiful face turned towards Atticus. Atticus was taken aback. He had assumed that his previous, almost curt refusal would have deterred Fleur. Yet her persistence surprised him. Her determination was unwavering, and he found himself moved by her sincerity. Her emotions were genuine, her courage and honesty more radiant than her appearance. "Of course, Miss Delacour," Atticus replied after a brief pause, standing up slowly. "I see no reason to refuse a dance of friendship with you." His words, though pointed, did not anger Fleur. Instead, a genuine smile spread across her face as she took his hand, leading him to the dance floor. Atticus placed his hand gently on Fleur's waist, while her delicate hand rested on his shoulder. Despite the lively music, they danced slowly, lost in their own world. Fleur gazed up at Atticus with admiration, her voice slightly hoarse. "I love this castle you conjured. It's beautiful." "Perhaps you haven't noticed, Miss Delacour," Atticus replied with a smile, "but Headmaster Dumbledore and the Hogwarts staff also played a significant role. It wasn't my work alone." "But the idea was yours, wasn't it? If you're determined to give me all the credit," Atticus said with a playful smirk, "then so be it." Fleur chuckled softly, though her smile held a hint of sadness, her eyes lowered, resting on Atticus's chest. Will the castle still be here after the ball is over?" Atticus Blaine's eyelids fluttered slightly, leaving him momentarily speechless. Professor Moody, seated at the faculty table during a brief respite, observed Atticus Blaine and Fleur Delacour as they glided across the dance floor. His hand, clutching a wine bottle, was suspended in midair, unmoving. The blue magical eye appeared frozen, while his normal eye revealed a profound loneliness in its depths. End of this chapter. Chapter 714, Good, Evil, and Perspective. After the dance, Fleur reluctantly released Atticus Blaine's hand. "I hope my poor dancing didn't embarrass you, Miss Delacour," Atticus said politely, taking a step back with a calm demeanor. However, Fleur seemed unfazed by his modesty, her stubborn and affectionate gaze still locked onto his eyes. "I plan to work in the UK after graduation. Do you have any good suggestions?" Fleur inquired. Atticus stared deeply at her, his eyebrows knitting together unconsciously. "While I am not in a position to interfere with your choices, Miss Delacour, I urge you to think carefully and proceed with caution. This decision will shape your future life path," he advised solemnly. His words were sincere, driven by a desire to prevent Fleur from acting impulsively. He foresaw the British wizarding world becoming increasingly perilous, and if Fleur remained close to him, she might find herself entangled in the inevitable turmoil. In the early days of the impending war, assassination and rebellion would dominate the landscape. Atticus and Dumbledore, due to their positions, would have to employ cunning tactics, avoiding overly harsh measures. This wasn't because Atticus lacked understanding of war's cruelty, nor was it solely due to Dumbledore's constraints. It was simply that he couldn't bear the thought of it. Many Slytherin students had parents who had followed Voldemort, a fact he couldn't ignore. Yet, judging by Fleur's determined eyes, Atticus knew his words might not sway her. Fleur had boldly invited Professor Blaine to dance, and he hadn't refused. This audacious act caught the attention of the young witches, who, not yet discerning the difference between love and admiration, saw it as a golden opportunity. As soon as the dance ended, they flocked to Atticus, eyes filled with hope, extending their own invitations. In such a situation, Atticus saw no reason to dampen the students' spirits. He set aside his worries, nodded with a smile, and for the next half hour found himself unable to leave the dance floor. Outside the ice castle, a spectacular fireworks display lit up the sky. Fred, George, and their friend Lee Jordan had orchestrated the celebration for Atticus. They painstakingly arranged the fireworks on the ice and ignited them with their wands. The fireworks soared into the air, bursting into brilliant sparks. The crystal-clear ice castle reflected the dazzling light and shadows, transforming into a breathtaking spectacle under the cold night sky. Even villagers as far as Hogsmeade were drawn to the commotion at Hogwarts, stepping out into the snow to watch the display in the darkness. Laughter and joy echoed across the Hogwarts campus, as if it were the last song of happiness before the impending storm. Atticus's colleagues watched with smiles as he, sweaty and breathless, finally stepped off the stage and returned to the guest table for a drink. "You are quite popular with the students, Atticus," Professor Sprout remarked, adjusting her freshly cleaned wizard hat with a smile. "The changes since our school days have been remarkable." "We all know Atticus isn't one to seek the spotlight," Professor McGonagall added, her stern expression softened by a hint of a smile. "But I dare say Albus saw through it long ago, didn't he?" Professor Flitwick, standing on the table, turned to look at the smiling Dumbledore. "Oh, actually, Severus noticed Atticus's uniqueness before I did," Dumbledore replied, standing up. Atticus Blaine smiled and said, I didn't realize at the time that I would be welcoming such a strong competitor." Dumbledore's teasing elicited a burst of laughter, and Atticus shook his head slightly, smiling in return. To be honest, this is one of the most valuable aspects of Hogwarts. The staff here possess a pure heart, dedicating themselves wholeheartedly to their profession for decades. The relationships between colleagues are straightforward and genuine. If this were the Ministry of Magic, a newcomer like Atticus being considered as a successor would certainly face fierce opposition. "How wonderful," Dumbledore remarked, stepping out from behind the table to clink glasses with Atticus. He gazed at the students, dancing on the stage, releasing their youthful energy, eating and drinking at the dining table, and playing under the ice tree. Outside, in the square protected from the wind and snow by magic, children laughed and set off fireworks. Dumbledore watched them, removed his half-moon glasses, and gently wiped his moist eyes. "Who says it's not?" Atticus agreed, taking a sip of whiskey with a slight smile. "This beautiful moment belongs to everyone, Atticus. We should not leave anyone behind." Dumbledore's seemingly casual words made Atticus frown slightly. He turned to look at Dumbledore, who subtly suppressed his smile and glanced meaningfully toward the end of the faculty table, where Professor Moody sat alone, quietly observing the children at play. "I don't quite understand," Atticus said, withdrawing his gaze and falling silent for a moment. "She is our enemy, isn't she?" "Oh, about that," Dumbledore replied with a cheerful smile. "I wasn't the one who signed the application for Professor Moody's salary advance, Atticus, nor was it me who gave him the candy." The corners of Atticus's mouth twitched, his expression darkening as his mood soured. "She once saved Sirius on the night of the Quidditch final," Dumbledore continued gently. "Besides, when I look at the children living in the Forbidden Forest, Atticus, I don't believe Miss Cleona is the evil dark wizard people think she is." "No one's life is smooth sailing, Headmaster. Everyone has their secrets." Atticus remained unmoved. "With your wisdom, you must know that sometimes good and evil don't matter as much as one's position." "Oh, ho, ho. Perhaps you overestimate my wisdom, Atticus. I naively believe that good and evil are always more important than stance," Dumbledore said softly. "If you don't understand, think about Sirius's younger brother, Regulus. He once idolized Tom but didn't abandon his conscience, even sacrificing his life for it. And Severus, who was once swayed by Tom's incendiary words, ultimately returned to our side. I believe Severus did this not only out of love for Harry's mother, but because love stems from goodness, and Severus himself is kind." As Atticus lowered his head, pretending to appreciate the red wine in his glass, Dumbledore's expression grew solemn. "I'm not shirking responsibility, Atticus, but in this matter, you are more suitable than I am to reach out to Miss Cleona. Just like Severus back then, Miss Cleona must be full of confusion and pain now. Perhaps you can guide her in the right direction. Even according to your ideas, Atticus, if you can change her position, it would be an incredible victory for us, wouldn't it?" Atticus sighed and placed the goblet on the table with a thud. Professor Moody still held his wine bottle, perhaps too engrossed in the hall filled with laughter to notice. His vigilance and the blue magical eye in his socket seemed to have no. It wasn't until Atticus Blaine's shadow fell across his scarred face that he realized someone was there. Startled, he quickly stood up, leaning on his crutches. "Oh, do you have any advice, Professor Blaine?" Professor Moody asked gruffly, clutching his bottle tightly. He appeared somewhat anxious. Atticus offered a slight smile. "Oh, I'm here to ask you to dance, Professor Moody," he began, but upon seeing the astonishment on Moody's scarred visage, he couldn't help but chuckle. "Just kidding, Professor Moody. I'm heading out on patrol. Would you care to join me for a walk?" End of this chapter. Chapter 7:15, Step by Step. After stepping out of the grand gates of the ice castle, Atticus Blaine and Professor Moody paused for a moment, quietly observing the young wizards frolicking in the square. Fred and George, having grown weary of their firework antics, shifted their focus to the foreigners. They unveiled their latest hit, the Canary Biscuits, with Lee Jordan eagerly demonstrating the prank's effect to the curious Beauxbatons and Durmstrang students. With a sudden shiver, Lee transformed into a vibrant canary, strutting proudly before the amused crowd. Gabrielle giggled uncontrollably, while Fleur's eyes sparkled as she retrieved a handful of galleons from her small pearl bag. Atticus silently reminded himself to inspect any snack gift boxes he might receive from the young wizards at school. After a while, he led the way forward, with Professor Moody casting a backward glance at the castle scroll, which seemed to be crafted from the purest crystal, before following in silence. To the right of the square lay a flower bed adorned with vines and exquisite blooms on the ice, a creation of Professor Sprout. This picturesque setting provided an ideal spot for students whose passions were too fervent to contain. As Atticus and Moody strolled through the garden towards the lakeshore, they noticed that the castle's radiant glow did not reach them. In the shadows, at least 7 or 8 couples were locked in passionate embraces, with some even accidentally losing their dance skirts in their fervor. Atticus walked softly through the flower beds, maintaining his usual composure and making no comment. However, Moody's lips twitched as his magical eye observed more details, his expression slightly strained as he tried to appear nonchalant. The sound of his prosthetic leg and crutch tapping against the ice echoed in the air. As they were about to leave the illuminated area of the ice castle, they were caught off guard. Atticus halted at the boundary between light and darkness. Moody, slower to react, only noticed the commotion ahead with his magical eye moments later. It was Harry and Hermione who had somehow ended up by the lakeshore. Out of breath and seemingly in a hurry, they dashed towards the ice castle, not expecting to encounter Professors Blaine and Moody. Unable to stop in time, one collided with Professor Moody, while the other stumbled into Atticus's arms. "Nice socks, Potter," Professor Moody remarked with a rough grin, his magical eye piercing through Harry's robes. "Oh, yes, Dobby the house elf knitted them for me, for Christmas," Harry replied breathlessly, clearly eager to leave. He kept signaling to Hermione, who appeared momentarily stunned. "Careful, Miss Granger," Atticus said with a smile, noticing Hermione's teary eyes from bumping her nose against his chest. "I think Madame Pomfrey might have had a bit too much to drink tonight. If something happens to your nose, you might have to live with it." "Oh, sorry, Professor," Hermione apologized, rubbing her sore nose and feeling guilty, unable to meet the professor's eyes. She desperately searched for a plausible explanation for her and Harry's frantic behavior. However, Professor Blaine graciously stepped aside, showing no intention of pursuing the matter. Harry and Hermione exchanged furtive glances, both recognizing the surprise in each other's eyes. His eyes reflecting the shimmering lights of the ice castle. It's been quite the endeavor, but seeing everyone enjoy themselves makes it all worthwhile. Atticus Blaine and Moody had just watched 2 figures disappear into the jubilant crowd gathered in the square. Before they could proceed, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the shadows. Professor Snape emerged, his robe billowing around him, his expression stern and suspicious. "Atticus and Moody?" Snape's voice was sharp as he scrutinized them. "Did you see anyone pass by, Atticus?" "Sorry, Professor Snape, I didn't notice anyone," Atticus replied with a disarming smile. "Where's Professor Karkaroff? I thought I saw you with him Lear." "He's back on the ship," Snape muttered, his tone low and guarded. "He might not appreciate the antics you and Dumbledore are up to. What are your plans?" "Professor Moody and I are just patrolling the grounds to ensure everything remains peaceful," Atticus said, maintaining his cheerful demeanor. "Care to join us, Professor Snape?" Snape's gaze lingered on Atticus, ignoring Moody entirely. With a curt, "not interested," he turned and strode away, leaving the 2 behind. Moody's instincts tingled with a sense of unease. It seemed Potter and Granger had once again stumbled upon Snape and Karkaroff's secretive discussions. The last time this happened, Moody had gleaned crucial information from the young eavesdroppers. Now, he couldn't help but feel a mix of amusement at their audacity and curiosity about the professor's clandestine conversations. Moody's magical eye swiveled to Atticus Blaine, who appeared unperturbed by the situation. This was unusual for Blaine, and Moody's suspicions grew. "What a surprise!" Moody shouted over the howling wind and snow as they stepped out of the magical barrier. "Eavesdropping on professors isn't something to take lightly. When did you become so lenient, Blaine?" "Perhaps the truth isn't as it seems, Professor Moody," Atticus replied, his voice steady despite the storm. Maybe Potter and Granger simply wandered into Snape and Karkaroff's conversation by accident. To avoid embarrassment, they kept quiet, but they might have overheard something intriguing. Atticus's knowing smile suggested he had a deeper understanding of the situation. If that's the case, it's not entirely Potter and Granger's fault. They're caught in a difficult spot. Moody paused, considering Atticus's words. The snowstorm had erased the footprints of the young wizards who had passed earlier, leaving the two men momentarily lost in thought as they gazed back at their path. "What do you think of this party?" Atticus asked, his tone light as he admired the ice and snow castle he had crafted. "Truly remarkable," Moody rasped, his eyes fixed on the enchanting structure bathed in warm light. "I wager, Atticus, this will become a new legend at Hogwarts. Those who attended will remember this night for the rest of their lives." "Thank you," Atticus replied, his smile broadening as he took in the scene, satisfied with the magic he had brought to life. With a hint of satisfaction, Atticus Blaine mused, "Sometimes I'm amazed by the ingenious little ideas that pop into my head." Atticus had always been modest and unassuming in the presence of others. Much like Dumbledore, he never let his extraordinary abilities make him arrogant. It was rare for him to boast, so when Moody heard Atticus speak in such a manner, he was slightly taken aback. However, upon noticing the smug smile playing at the corners of Atticus's mouth, Moody saw a glimpse of the youthful exuberance that someone of Atticus's age should possess. This realization brought a sense of refreshment, and Moody felt his previously tense mood begin to ease. "Honestly, why are we just standing here?" Atticus muttered, as if suddenly aware of the cold snow beneath their feet. With a deft flick of his wand, which had slipped effortlessly into his palm, he conjured a light screen that matched the color of the snow, creating a tranquil space around them. Feeling a rumble in his stomach, Atticus realized he had only had some wine and nothing to eat. A spark of light flickered in his lavender eyes as he turned to Moody. "Would you like some food, Professor Moody?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine hospitality. End of this chapter. Chapter 716, Barbecue in the Snow. Moody never imagined that Atticus Blaine's idea of grabbing a bite to eat would unfold in such an unexpected manner. Atticus summoned an elf and instructed him to fetch a grill along with charcoal and skewers of minced beef and mutton. The house elves were remarkably efficient. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, Dobby and Rhea appeared by the lakeside, carrying everything Blaine had requested. After setting down the supplies and offering their assistance, which was politely declined, the elves bowed respectfully and vanished into the snow. "Please wait a moment, Professor Moody," Atticus said, as two wooden stakes rose from the ground. He deftly removed his dress jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and sat down with a contented smile. Picking up the skewers, he placed them on the grill, expertly tending to the sizzling meat. This casual demeanor and fluid movements left Professor Moody momentarily bewildered. He wagered that if anyone else witnessed this scene, it would surely become a memorable anecdote about Atticus Blaine, a tale that would elicit laughter for years to come. Snowflakes danced in the sky, blanketing the earth in a silvery sheen. The dreamlike castle in the distance captured the attention of all who gazed upon it, like a beacon in the darkness. Unbeknownst to them, the flickering sparks by the Black Lake were the handiwork of the renowned Atticus Blaine, grilling meat with ease. Before long, a tantalizing aroma filled the air, mingling with the warmth of the coals. Moody, despite his missing piece of nose, caught the scent wafting from the grill. As the golden fat dripped from the barbecue, he was surprised to find himself developing an appetite. "It's surprising, Blaine," Moody remarked, suppressing the absurdity of the situation and a faint urge to laugh. He finally sat down, observing Atticus's handsome face, flushed by the charcoal fire, and chuckled. "Who would have thought that a great magician like you is also a master of cooking?" "This is nothing," Atticus replied, focusing intently on the barbecue. He squinted slightly, speaking lazily. "Perhaps you don't know, Professor Moody, but before I returned to Hogwarts to teach, I wandered around Europe for 2 years. To survive, I occasionally ran errands for others. Eating and sleeping in the open was a common occurrence." Moody's lips twitched as if he wanted to laugh, but he ultimately suppressed it, nodding gently. "It must have been a hard time, Blaine," he said in a hoarse voice. The silence lingered for about 2 minutes as the barbecue released an incredible aroma under the flame's caress. Atticus deftly sprinkled some spices and crushed salt over the meat, then began to roll it on the grill. After a while, he picked up the perfectly cooked barbecue, examining it carefully by the firelight. "Here," Atticus offered, handing the roast to Moody. After a moment of hesitation, Moody raised his hand, slightly flustered, and accepted it. As he gazed at the unfamiliar preparation, a strange emotion welled up within him, a mix of satisfaction, tinged with sadness and fear. With a pop, Atticus opened 2 bottles of butterbeer, handing one to Moody. He then turned his attention back to the grill, skewering a few more pieces of meat for himself. He took a hearty swig from his bottle, letting out a contented sigh as about a quarter of the liquid disappeared. Moody, in contrast, adopted a more refined approach. He took a small bite of the meat, savoring it slowly. Yet, Atticus's bold behavior made him momentarily forget the aroma of the barbecue. He watched in astonishment as Atticus continued to enjoy his meal with unabashed enthusiasm. Atticus Blaine was being grilled by the charcoal fire. Through the hazy smoke, he couldn't believe that he, who had always been known for his elegance and gentleness, could present such a rugged image. Or perhaps this was his true self, hidden beneath the burden of fame, forcing him to disguise his real nature. "I still prefer Muggle beer," Atticus remarked with a hint of egret. He noticed that Moody hadn't touched the bottle in his hand and raised an eyebrow. "You need to enjoy this kind of barbecue with beer, Professor Moody. That's the only way to make it complete." Well, Moody hesitated. "I need a wine glass, Blaine." "A wine glass? Oh no, Professor Moody. If you keep ruining the mood of this barbecue, just go ahead," Atticus replied. To be honest, Moody was a bit hesitant and resistant, but for some reason, he was even more reluctant to disobey Blaine's request. So, he reluctantly raised the bottle to his lips and took a sip. The butterbeer that Blaine had brought was not warmed. In the cold weather, the foamy drink slid down Moody's throat like a knife, causing him to frown. Yet, after the initial cold sting, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction, which made him emit a nasal sound unconsciously. "Ahem, it's a very peculiar feeling, Blaine," Moody said, quickly turning his nasal sound into a heavy cough to cover his embarrassment. He asked subtly, "Where is this custom from?" Atticus didn't respond, just smiled casually. He turned his head and gazed at the bustling world in a trance. Seeing Blaine's sudden silence, Moody moved his lips, but then fell silent, staring at the flickering flames in the snow. The fluffy snow muffled all noise between the white mountains and the black water. Although the ice castle was lively and filled with joy, with students' laughter echoing and fireworks occasionally bursting in the sky above the square, the lake shore was monotonous. The wind whistled dully, but after a while, its sound faded into the background, leaving the world peaceful, as if only the two of them remained. Though it was late at night and the sky was shrouded by overcast clouds with no stars or moon, the castle did not appear very dark. The snow absorbed the bright lights from the ice castle, diffusing them in all directions, making the white and desolate mountains look beautiful. Even the forest had a touch more color. "What do you think of life at Hogwarts, Professor Moody?" Atticus asked, withdrawing his calm gaze. He flicked the charcoal fire with a poker and began to deal with the raw meat again. "Oh," Moody responded, caught off guard by the unexpected question. He couldn't escape his sad and bitter mood for a moment and blurted out, "Ah, very good." Then, taking a deep breath, his voice softened, and he said in a soothing tone, "It's nice here, Blaine. There aren't so many dangers that could take your life at any moment, and not as many people eager to kill you. Minerva, Phileas, and Pomona, most of the colleagues are friendly. The work isn't complicated. As long as you show some real skills, you can win applause in class." "You're only seeing the surface, Professor Moody," Atticus said, occasionally stirring the charcoal fire. The blazing sparks flew into the air with the rising heat, blooming brightly before being extinguished by the cold. He continued calmly, "In fact, for thousands of years, this ancient school has been just one step away from collapse. The threat of destruction has loomed over this oldest magic school in the European magic world. Countless enemies hide in the shadows, hoping for Hogwarts to disappear." Atticus's words were shocking, but Professor Moody did not retort in astonishment. Atticus Blaine blinked in understanding, then turned his gaze toward the ancient castle nearby. For thousands of years, the former Royal Society of Wizards has evolved into the Ministry of Magic. The royal family has been excluded from the magical world. We've waged several wars against goblins, werewolves, vampires, and centaurs. We've even battled against those ancient secrets of the earth. Witches and wizards have clashed many times, yet Hogwarts has emerged victorious time and again, rising from the ruins each time. The defeated had no choice but to accept that they could not destroy Hogwarts. Do you understand why, Professor Moody? What is it? Moody asked, his eyes still fixed on the ancient castle. Because Hogwarts is no longer just a magic seshqua. Ool, Atticus replied, a hint of emotion in his voice as he looked at the time-worn castle. Founded by the four founders, Hogwarts has become a belief that endures in people's hearts. Countless individuals are willing to sacrifice their lives for this belief. Faith does not vanish, Professor Moody. It doesn't need an actual organization to survive, nor does it require protection by power to endure. Moody appeared thoughtful, and Atticus continued, another very important point is, he shifted his gaze from the castle to Moody, his lavender eyes as deep as an abyss. Hogwarts never harbors hatred. End of this chapter. Chapter 717. The priestess whose true identity is exposed. Hogwarts never harbors hatred. How has this ancient school of magic endured through countless disasters to exist today? Moody seemed deeply moved. His normal eye alternated between confusion, pain, and hatred. These intense emotions made his body tremble as he sat by the lake, struggling fiercely within himself. Could he truly forget those unforgettable hatreds? For over 10 centuries, Muggles and wizards have been embroiled in an unforgivable enmity with the Druids. Yet, Atticus Blaine suggested that, for the sake of survival, they must let go of these hatreds. Atticus understood the impact his words would have on those around him. He knew that, despite his efforts to persuade others, he remained an outsider with a broader perspective than Vitia. What were these Druids fantasizing about? Destroying the Holy See? It was laughable. As he had just told Vitia, the Holy See, like Hogwarts, had become a deeply ingrained belief in the hearts of Muggles, a belief that could not be easily destroyed. Moreover, the Holy See wielded an omniscient influence in the Muggle world and possessed unfathomable extraordinary powers in the shadows. Did they expect to submit to Voldemort, hoping that after the Dark Lord conquered the magical world, he would use all its power to defeat the Holy See? Atticus did not doubt Voldemort's ambition to enslave the Muggle world after conquering the British wizarding world. However, in his view, this ambition was sheer folly. Voldemort had never truly acknowledged Muggles or understood their potential. If he attempted to overthrow the Muggle world's order, the powerful and extraordinary forces and civilizations around the globe would converge upon him and tear him apart. Silence lingered for a long time. Atticus said nothing more, quietly finishing his kebab. Moody remained lost in thought, still holding the piece of barbecue that Atticus had handed him earlier, having only taken a single bite. Ah! Atticus sighed contentedly, glancing at the ice castle. I'm going back to the orphanage tomorrow, he suddenly announced. Oh, Moody was caught off guard by Atticus's sudden mention of the orphanage. He stumbled over his response, his thoughts drifting to the orphanage and the children there. He felt guilty for the children, having approached the orphanage with ulterior motives and leaving quietly after achieving his goals. This undoubtedly hurt the children's feelings. The saddest part was that he had embarked on a path of revenge and could never fully realize this. Moody noticed Atticus looking at him with a tilted head and suddenly snapped back to reality. Moody was not Vitia Cleona. Orphanage? Moody tried to calm his chaotic and gloomy thoughts, expressing surprise. You grew up in a Muggle orphanage? I'm sorry, I hadn't heard about that. Atticus's mouth twitched slightly as he looked away. She had investigated some of Atticus Blaine's past at the orphanage. She knew that Atticus Blaine had been abandoned at birth, with his mother intending to throw him into the river outside the nearby orphanage. An old man, who had since passed away, had saved him. If Blaine's parents knew their child would achieve such greatness in the future, would they regret abandoning him? Had Atticus Blaine ever tried to find his father? At least, his parents loved him dearly, and sacrifice themselves to protect him. Vitya was startled by the thought that crossed her mind. Over the years, she had never forgotten the night when the light of hatred shone once more. She harbored hatred in her heart, allowing it to consume her thoughts, seemingly forgetting her father and the sacrifice her mother made to protect her. "Do you hate them?" Moody asked impulsively, unable to contain himself. The question echoed in Atticus Blaine's mind, leaving him momentarily dazed. It was the second time he had encountered this inquiry. At the orphanage, such topics were taboo. Neither the staff nor the children dared to mention the parents who had abandoned them. The first time Atticus heard this question was from Harry. "The staff at the orphanage and the children I grew up with gave me a happy childhood," Atticus had once told Vidya, offering a different perspective than Harry's. He smiled and continued, "My life after entering Hogwarts was also fulfilling and joyful. Severus took great care of me, and Dumbledore showed concern, albeit with ulterior motives. But having these experiences is enough for me." Moody pursed his dry lips. "Speaking of which," Atticus said, relaxing with a smile, "how are your old friends, Professor Moody? Have they received care and treatment?" Moody was taken aback for several seconds before understanding what Atticus was implying. "Well," Moody nodded, "thanks for your help, Blaine." Atticus Blaine understood the importance of letting go of hatred and focusing on the beauty in life. It was a philosophy akin to that of a druid, yet it was his own. However, she had been consumed by hatred, her actions becoming increasingly malevolent. Suddenly, a sharp explosion pierced through the howling wind and snow, reaching Atticus's ears. He turned towards the ice castle, where a series of colorful fireworks illuminated the sky. The young wizards were likely celebrating, setting off all the fireworks Atticus had brought. Moody, too, was captivated by the spectacle of the ice castle, his eyes filled with wonder. But an unsettling sensation coursed through his body, causing him to stand abruptly. His heart raced, and his eyes widened in horror. His distorted features began to shift, as if molded by unseen hands. The socket holding his magical eye swelled uncomfortably, and the blue eye made a grinding noise, as if it were being squeezed out. New pupils emerged, the scars on his cheeks faded, and his skin turned pale. Vibrant emerald green hair sprouted among the gray strands on his head. With a snap, his wooden leg fell to the ground, replaced by a rapidly growing new limb. Moody was terrified, realizing he hadn't taken a sip of Polyjuice potion since leaving the ice castle with Atticus. The transformation time had expired, and his true identity was about to be revealed. In truth, the exposure might have occurred long ago. Atticus likely suspected the truth the night before the warrior selection, yet for reasons unknown, he chose not to confront it. Perhaps he was trying to understand her motives for infiltrating Hogwarts. Despite this, Atticus never exposed her, maintaining a silent understanding between them. But now, that understanding was shattered, and she was about to reveal her true identity to Atticus Blaine. Her eyes, now a vivid green, were filled with boundless panic. It wasn't just the impending failure of her and Voldemort's plan that terrified her. There were deeper, more personal reasons. She dreaded facing Atticus Blaine. Due to a mix of guilt and some inexplicable factors, Atticus Blaine, who had his back turned to Vitya, suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, it's getting late. I think it's time to put those rambunctious kids to bed." With that, Atticus leaped off the ice and headed toward the ice castle without a backward glance. "Professor Moody, please tidy up the grill and those empty bottles with the help of the house elves," he instructed, waving dismissively with his back to the lake. Then, he strode into the fierce snowstorm. With a snap, the magical barrier shattered, allowing the wind and snow to reclaim this small, once clear space. On the lake's shore, Vitya, her emerald green hair swirling in the wind, stood gazing longingly at Atticus's retreating figure. End of this chapter. Still snoring softly in his bed, her excitement turned into a mix of exasperation and amusement. "Harry, you won't believe what I've found!" she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Harry blinked, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. "What is it, Hermione?" he asked, his curiosity piqued despite his grogginess. Hermione took a deep breath, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I was in the library last night, and I found something about the golden egg. It's a clue, Harry." a clue that could help us figure out the next task in the Tri-Wizard tournament. Harry's eyes widened, and he felt a surge of adrenaline. Really? That's amazing, Hermione. What did you find? Before Hermione could respond, Ron stirred in his bed, mumbling incoherently as he slowly woke up. What's going on? He asked, rubbing his eyes and looking around the room in confusion. Hermione's found something important about the golden egg, Harry explained, his excitement growing. We need to hear what she has to say. Ron sat up, his interest piqued. All right, let's hear it then, he said, stifling a yawn. Hermione nodded, her expression serious. I found a reference to a similar egg in a book about magical creatures. It mentioned that the egg's song can only be understood underwater. We need to listen to it while submerged to decipher the message. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, their minds racing with possibilities. So, we need to find a way to listen to it underwater, Harry mused, already thinking of potential solutions. Exactly, Hermione confirmed, her eyes shining with determination. We have to figure out how to breathe underwater for the second task. We don't have much time, so we need to start preparing right away. The three friends sat together, their minds buzzing with ideas and plans. The quiet dormitory was soon filled with their animated discussion, the excitement of discovery overshadowing the lingering sleepiness. As they talked, Harry couldn't help but feel grateful for Hermione's relentless pursuit of knowledge. Her discovery had given them a crucial advantage, and he knew that with her help, they stood a better chance of succeeding in the tournament. The pale sunlight continued to stream through the window, casting a warm glow over the room as the trio plotted their next steps. Despite the challenges ahead, Harry felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. With friends like Hermione and Ron by his side, he was ready to face whatever the Triwizard tournament had in store. Awakened by the sound of the door crashing open, Atticus Blaine tried to get out of bed, frowning immediately. "Why haven't you gotten up yet?" he asked. "That's because," Ron mumbled, still half asleep, squinting and rubbing his clothes. "We stayed in the library with a madman until 2 a.m. last night." "Stop dawdling, Ron! Get up!" Hermione commanded, striding over. She scooped Ron's clothes off the floor and thrust them into his arms, urging Harry to get dressed and come downstairs with her. "What happened, Hermione?" Harry asked, as he and Ron hurriedly dressed. Hermione dragged them out of the dormitory before they even had a chance to wash up. "Just wait and see, Harry. You'll be surprised." Hermione replied with a smile as they descended the spiral staircase. As they neared the common room, Harry heard a familiar voice from below. A wave of indescribable joy surged through him. A hope he thought impossible now seemed within reach. Harry, filled with excitement, leaped over Hermione, who was leading the way, and jumped off the platform. He quickly regained his balance and continued down the stairs. When he finally reached the bottom, he saw a group of students gathered around a speaker in the middle of the common room. The moment he recognized the figure, Harry's face lit up with a broad smile, his heart racing with excitement. The man, who had been facing away from Harry, turned slowly at the sound of his landing. He smiled warmly and opened his arms. "Sirius, why are you here?" Harry shouted, unable to contain his excitement. He dashed forward, vaulting over a sofa in his path, and embraced Sirius tightly. It wasn't until Hermione and a surprised Ron joined them that Harry and Sirius released each other. Sirius looked at Harry, who was nearly as tall as him, with affection. He reached out and ruffled Harry's messy hair. "Isn't Christmas meant to be spent with family?" Sirius said with a smile. Harry was too overjoyed to speak, grinning broadly instead. Spending Christmas with family was a dream Harry had longed for over a decade. Watching the touching reunion, Hermione, aware of Harry's struggles, wiped tears from her eyes, while Ron sniffled emotionally. "Oh, I think we should stop wasting time. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, I need you to pack your bags quickly. We still have a long way to go," Sirius said, ruffling Harry's hair once more. "Where are we going, Sirius?" Harry asked eagerly. "I remember telling you that my ancestors left me a house, and I'm living there now," Sirius explained, nudging Harry to pack his things. "I asked Creature, the house elf who serves the Black family, to decorate the old house. We can spend the rest of your Christmas holiday there. By the way, Remus is also there, so we'd better not keep him waiting too long. At the very least, we have to get back for dinner." Professor Lupin, Hermione whispered excitedly. Are we going too? Serious? Ron asked, wide-eyed with disbelief at the invitation. Why not, Ron? Molly and Arthur let me stay at your house during the summer vacation, didn't they? Sirius replied with a smile. Before coming here, I already spoke to Dumbledore. He had no objections, just reminded you not to forget your Christmas vacation homework. I originally planned to ask Atticus to come with us, but Atticus Blaine has returned to London. Children, we've missed the Hogwarts Express, he announced with a hint of urgency in his voice. I can't apparate all three of you by myself, so we'll have to take the night bus. If you want to see your Christmas presents as soon as possible, then pack your bags quickly. End of this chapter. Chapter 719, Remus's Changes. A harsh screech of brakes shattered the tranquility of Grimmauld Place, which lay blanketed in snow. The sudden gust of wind scattered the snowflakes, and the vibration in the air caused a rusty streetlight a few steps away to flicker erratically due to faulty wiring. Ugh! Harry was the first to leap off the night bus, ignoring Stan Shunpike's warm farewell. He crouched on the snow, which was as thick as the snow on the grounds of Hogwarts, and retched. Hermione and Ron followed him out, bending over and resting their hands on their knees, gasping for breath. The wizard who designed this bus should be sent to Azkaban for life, Ron panted angrily. I swear. The cold, fresh air revived Harry, giving him enough energy to take in the small square in the London suburbs. The circular square was surrounded by single-family homes, neatly arranged but old and gloomy, as if they were isolated from the world. Some houses were completely dark, with broken windows and walls marred by deep cracks, as if they had endured an earthquake. Even the inhabited homes were in disrepair, with trash piled outside the front steps. If I ride the night bus again, I'll be poisoned by Snape, Harry exclaimed, gulping down the cold air. I advise you to retract that oath, Harry, Sirius said, stepping off the bus last. His face was pale, and he was panting, burdened by 2 large boxes. Because the likelihood of that oath coming true is quite high. Speaking of which, Hermione, what did you pack in these boxes? Yours alone is heavier than Harry and Ron combined. Oh, sorry, Sirius, Hermione blushed. I brought a few books to pass the time. Books? To pass the time? Oh, don't worry, we can solve that with magic, Sirius replied with a helpless smile. He waved off Hermione's attempt to help and, after a cautious glance around, tapped the boxes with his wand. They trembled slightly and floated an inch above the snow. Come along, you three. We'd better not let any muggles see us, or Molly will blame me for making Arthur work overtime during the Christmas holiday. Sirius's joke elicited chuckles from Harry, Hermione, and Ron. They helped guide the floating boxes as they followed Sirius to a wooden door with peeling black paint. The door's knocker was a large silver snake, its fierce appearance reminding Harry of the serpent he had encountered in the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets during his second year. Though unsettling, he understood that Sirius's ancestors hailed from Slytherin House, so it was unsurprising. As the new year approached, their prejudice against Slytherin House had waned, largely due to the subtle influence of a certain professor who had been a Slytherin himself. Come in, you lot, Sirius said, knocking on the door with his wand. A series of loud metallic clinks sounded from behind the door, and warm air flowed out as it gradually opened. This place used to be quite unimpressive, but it's much better now. Sirius crossed the threshold first, turning to wave the trio inside with a smile. Since entering the wizarding world, the only wizarding family Harry had visited was the Weasleys, and Ron's home had fulfilled Harry's ideal vision of a complete wizarding family. Eagerly, he squeezed in with Sirius, eager to see what awaited them inside. Atticus Blaine's godfather's home exuded an air of mystery and history. The faint scent of incense lingered in the air, subtly masking an underlying smell of decay. This was hardly surprising, given that the house was Sirius's ancestral home, standing for countless years. During the time Sirius was unjustly imprisoned, the house had fallen into disrepair. As if sensing their presence, the gas lamps lining the narrow hallway flickered to life, casting a bright glow. Atticus noticed that while the metal brackets of these lamps were speckled with rust, the glass lampshades were impeccably clean. The wallpaper and carpet underfoot were new, with the carpet being particularly remarkable. The intricate patterns woven into the cashmere carpet seemed to shift Annie to change, captivating Atticus and Ron. They stared at it for a moment before realizing what the flowing designs depicted. "This is the scene of Crumb using the Wronski feint to outmaneuver Lynch in the World Cup," Atticus exclaimed in surprise. "And this is the classic moment from the last World Cup," Ron added, eyes wide with admiration. "This rug is amazing." "I knew you'd appreciate it," Sirius beamed with pride. "This carpet cost me about 2 months' salary." Hermione raised an eyebrow, clearly disapproving of Sirius's decision to spend a significant amount of money on a carpet. However, given the Black family's recent hardships, it was understandable. Before their decline, the Black family was renowned in the wizarding world, and Sirius, born into nobility, had a different perspective on money. "Leave the box here. Creature will handle it later," Sirius instructed. "Is Creature doing well?" Hermione asked eagerly, following Sirius closely, while Atticus and Ron continued to admire the mesmerizing carpet beneath their feet. "He's so-so," Sirius replied hesitantly. "Ever since I decided to renovate this house, he's been reluctant to show himself." Sirius casually patted the walls. "There used to be portraits of many Black family ancestors here. Some were beyond repair, so I stored them in a separate room. But Creature kept rehanging them when I wasn't home. We had quite a row before he finally obeyed my orders. Be careful, you three." Hermione's arm brushed against a curtain on the wall, and Sirius immediately cautioned, "Behind this curtain is the last portrait. I can't remove it, so be careful. She won't welcome the guests I bring back." His words piqued their curiosity, and Atticus and Ron finally tore their eyes away from the carpet to glance at the curtain. They then followed Sirius to a door, where stairs on the right led upward. Atticus cast a curious glance at the dimly lit staircase before following Sirius through the door. "Atticus, Ron, Hermione, are you all right?" A group of people descended the stairs, passing a Christmas tree adorned with mistletoe and ribbons, surrounded by several fairies. They entered a kitchen with rough stone walls that, despite their rugged appearance, were impeccably tidy. A long table, surrounded by dining chairs, dominated the room, and Remus sat at the far end, smiling warmly at them. Atticus and his friends beamed with happiness. Compared to their last meeting during the summer, Remus appeared healthier, his cheeks slightly fuller, giving him a more youthful appearance. The faint melancholy that once lingered in his expression had nearly vanished, and there was a sense of renewed vitality about him. There were a few extra lines etched between his eyebrows, adding a touch of gravity to Remus's otherwise gentle demeanor. The vertical lines on the ground seemed to accentuate this newfound dignity. "Not bad, Remus," Harry remarked as he approached, casting a curious glance at the scattered parchments on the table before Remus. They were filled with various charts and diagrams that were beyond Harry's comprehension. "And how about you? How's your business with the goblins?" Harry inquired. Remus exhaled deeply, a gesture of relief in the company of trusted friends, where he didn't need to maintain a facade. He offered a wry smile and shrugged. "I can only say it's far more troublesome than teaching defense against the dark arts." End of this chapter. Chapter 720, Family Banquet. "What's wrong?" Harry asked with concern. Remus, like Sirius, had been a close friend of his father and had taken great care of him during his time teaching at Hogwarts. The most profound white magic Harry had mastered, the Patronus charm, was taught to him by Remus. To this day, the young wizards all regarded Remus as an excellent defense against the dark arts professor. While his classes might not have been as original as Professor Blaine's, they were certainly more vivid and easier to understand. Hermione and Ron also turned their attention to Remus, retracting their glances from around the room. Remus was about to continue speaking when Sirius, who had led Harry and the others into the basement, returned. He was carrying 3 wrapped gifts in his arms. "It's all boring stuff. We can talk about it later, Harry," Remus said, stopping himself and smiling gently. "I thought you might be more interested in the Christmas gifts Sirius has prepared for you." "I was going to send something to Hogwarts," Sirius said with a smile as he distributed the 3 gift boxes to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "But since I plan to invite you here for the holidays, I thought I might as well give you the gifts myself." Last Christmas, Sirius had not yet been cleared of being a murderer, but he still remembered to prepare a Christmas gift for Harry. The firebolt he gave Harry was the best among broomsticks. No other young wizard at Hogwarts had such a fine broomstick. Although Ron had anticipated Sirius's generous nature, he was still taken aback when he opened his gift. His eyes widened in surprise. "Oh my God, this is—" "A set of pure gold gobstones," Sirius said with a smile, looking at Ron. "I heard from Harry that you're quite good at this game, Ron." "Oh, it's just—" Ron stammered, his cheeks glowing with joy. "Practice makes perfect," he added modestly, though it was clear he was thrilled with the gift. Harry opened his gift next. Sirius had given him a delicate and dexterous dagger, its handle engraved with intricate magical symbols. Harry held it up to the light, examining it closely. "Why did you give me this, Sirius?" "This dagger is not simple, Harry," Sirius explained, anticipating Harry's curiosity. "It's a powerful alchemical tool. It can break many magical restrictions. If you ever find yourself unable to enter somewhere with Alohomora, you can try using this." Harry was content with the explanation. "As for you, Hermione," Sirius said, scratching his head and looking a bit unsure, "I'm not very experienced in giving gifts to girls, but I thought you wouldn't say no to a magic book. You can't buy this at Flourish and Blotts. I found it in the Black Family Library." "Thank you, Sirius," Hermione said, examining the book titled Saving You from Dying with great interest. She nodded her thanks to Sirius. The dinner was held in a very pleasant atmosphere, complemented by delicious food. Sirius made an exception and allowed Harry, Ron, and Hermione to taste a few glasses of whiskey from his father's collection. Although Remus wasn't entirely supportive, he chose not to say much on such a happy occasion. "Speaking of which, Remus, what kind of trouble have you gotten into?" Harry asked, feeling the effects of the whiskey. It was much stronger than the butterbeer he was used to, and after just a small glass, the world around him began to spin. Yet, he didn't mind the dizziness. With his godfather and Remus by his side, he felt there was nothing to fear, even if he lost his senses. A lazy smile lingered on Harry's face as he spoke to Remus, who was engaged in a conversation with Hermione about the performance of the warriors. The first event of the Triwizard Tournament was underway. "It's about product promotion," Remus began, clearly reluctant to burden them with work-related stress. "Fairies hold significant power in the European magical world. Our promotional efforts here are progressing smoothly. Many wizarding families and organizations have shown great interest in the alchem I call items developed by Atticus Blaine, and we've started supplying them. However, the situation with the Magic Congress in the United States is quite complicated. Our sales license application has been stalled, and they require a safety performance analysis of the product." Realizing he was about to embark on a lengthy explanation, Remus shook his head and wisely shifted the topic. "Don't worry, it will be resolved." "Harry, regarding the second task of the tournament, Hermione, do you have any clues?" After Hermione explained the hints she had deciphered from the mermaid about the golden egg she obtained in the first task, both Sirius and Remus admired her cleverness. The second task would likely take place under the Black Lake, where the champions had to retrieve their most precious treasure within an hour, or risk losing it forever. Despite the inevitable obstacles, Hermione was still unsure how to remain underwater for an hour. "Actually, it's not that difficult," Sirius said slowly, exchanging a knowing glance with Remus. "Oh, stop it, Sirius!" Hermione exclaimed, suddenly anxious. She covered her ears, unwilling to hear any more. "I have to figure it out on my own." "All right," Sirius shrugged, conceding with a hint of amusement. Harry, Sirius, and Remus hadn't seen each other for some time, and their last meeting with Remus was during the summer vacation. They had endless topics to discuss. They recounted the enchanting Christmas ball from the previous night in vivid detail, especially the magnificent ice and snow castle created by Professor Blaine and Professor Dumbledore, which left both Sirius and Remus in awe. Sirius also shared some of his thrilling experiences as an Auror over the past 6 months, tales of pursuing dark wizards and lawbreakers that left Harry and his friends exhilarated. Curious about Remus and the Goblin's alchemy workshop, they planned to visit Diagon Alley during the Christmas vacation. The delightful dinner extended until midnight, after which an enthusiastic Sirius led the 3 slightly dizzy youngsters on a tour of the house. They explored from the basement to Sirius's bedroom on the 5th floor. Despite Sirius's claims of a thorough cleaning, Hermione noticed some unpleasant remnants, such as a row of dried house elf heads hanging on the wall leading upstairs. If they hadn't already encountered more terrifying sights in the Hogwarts kitchen corridor, they might have been shocked by this display. These heads were clearly not Sirius's doing, but rather a nod to Kreacher's sentiments, despite his frequent impatience with them. Overall, the old house was impressive, especially to Ron, who seemed particularly envious of Sirius's inheritance. "Our house looks like a broom shed compared to this," Ron remarked glumly as they ascended the steps. "I don't think so, Ron," Sirius replied with a burp. "I think Arthur and Molly's house is wonderful. It feels like home. When I stay there, it reminds me of the time I spent at James's house." He affectionately patted Harry on the head. That is, just as Harry was about to inquire about his father's home, Hermione suddenly covered her mouth and pointed to the sign on the door next to her. "Ah, yes," Sirius acknowledged, trailing off. His eyes followed the direction she pointed, and he paused for a moment before smiling. "Yes, Hermione, that's Regulus's room." End of this chapter.